Long before I ever saw the apartment, I told myself that Ashmere Heights would be the start of something new, something safe. I had spent 21 years learning how to disappear in my own home, tuning out my mother's criticism, my father's cold silences, and my brother's cruel laughter that always came when I tried to speak up. By the time I packed my suitcase, I wasn't running to something. I was running away. The building stood at the edge of Ashmere Hill, an old brick structure dulled by fog and years of rain. The narrow staircase creaked like it remembered every tenant who had come before me. My room smelled faintly of wood polish and something older, something that clung to the corners no matter how many windows I opened. The spare bedroom had a single crooked door, the closet. The knob wouldn't turn no matter how hard I twisted. The landlord, a man with gray hair and eyes like static, just shrugged. "Storage," he said. "Been sealed for years. Best leave it be." It didn't feel like storage. It felt like silence held behind wood. My new roommate Lillian arrived that evening. She was everything I wasn't: composed, confident, the kind of woman who seemed built from straight lines and unshakable calm. "It's fine," she said, brushing invisible dust off her sleeves. "Old buildings always have quirks. We'll make it home." That night, the fog pressed against the windows like something breathing. I lay in bed, trying to let the quiet soothe me. But beneath the hum of the radiator came another sound. Faint, almost apologetic. A soft scrape from the closet. Then another. I sat up, pulse hammering. "Lillian?" She mumbled something from her room, half asleep. I told myself it was just pipes, or the wind, or the building settling. I wanted to believe it. I'd spent years forcing myself not to believe what I heard. My parents' fights, my brother's jeers, my own heartbeat screaming that something was wrong. But the sound came again, slow and deliberate. And for the first time in years, I whispered into the dark, "Please stop." By the third week, the noises had names: scraping, tapping, and the soft rhythmic thud like a pulse under the floorboards. I told myself I was tired. I was working long shifts at the campus library, studying late, skipping meals. Exhaustion made the mind cruel. But every time I passed the closet, my eyes caught something in the brass knob. A faint vibration, like breath fogging on glass. Lillian didn't believe me. "Old pipes," she said, sipping her coffee. "You're hearing echoes. This place is practically vintage." "I'm not imagining it," I insisted. "The handle moves." "Then don't look at it," she said, smiling without warmth. That answer cut deep. It was the same tone my mother used when she told me I was too sensitive, too dramatic, too much. One night, I wedged a chair under the knob just to be safe. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of it rattling. The chair vibrated. I froze, clutching my blanket like a shield. My phone sat inches away, but my fingers wouldn't move. The fear was heavy, familiar. It felt like being a child again, waiting for the shouting to stop on the other side of my bedroom wall. When morning came, the chair was still there, the knob, motionless. But something had changed. Objects began to shift. My sketchbook moved from desk to bed. The kitchen light flickered when I walked past. A cup of coffee I'd left untouched had a faint lipstick stain. Lillian's shade, though she swore she hadn't touched it. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I needed rest. Maybe the apartment was just old. But deep down, I recognized that feeling crawling up my spine. It wasn't just fear. It was memory, the kind that whispered, "No one's going to believe you." That night, I dreamed of a door that opened to nothing, and when I woke, my hand was resting on the closet knob. By December, the apartment no longer felt like a home. It felt like a test. Lillian kept her distance, leaving early, returning late. She started locking her door. I caught her watching me sometimes, her expression unreadable, her lips tight like she was holding something back. "You've been talking in your sleep," she said one morning. "What?" "You keep saying stop it over and over. Sometimes you laugh. It's unsettling." I laughed nervously. Guess I'm losing it. She didn't laugh back. That afternoon, I called my brother. I think something's wrong with the apartment, I said. He chuckled. Something's always wrong with you, Serafina. I'm serious. You always are. He hung up. That was the moment I realized fear is easier to live with than disbelief. At least fear keeps you company. The next night I heard it again. Scraping, whispering, a low thud. But this time, it wasn't coming from the closet. It was coming from the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster and heard breathing. My knees buckled. "Lillian," I shouted. She burst from her room, her hair tangled, eyes wide. "What the hell is going on?" "You hear it, right?" I gasped. We stood there, side by side, listening. For one horrible second there was silence, then a single sharp knock from inside the closet. Lillian turned pale. "We should call someone." "Who?" "The landlord, maybe." We called. No answer. We knocked on neighbors' doors. No one opened. The fog outside was so thick it erased the world. When we returned, the closet door stood open. Inside, a folded gray blanket and 2 coffee mugs that weren't ours. My breath caught. "What is this?" Lillian shook her head. "I don't know." But I saw her hand trembling. She was scared too. After that night, nothing in the apartment stayed still. The heater clicked in patterns like Morse code. The lights buzzed louder when I entered the room. Sometimes I'd see a shadow under the closet door when it was closed, thin, human-shaped, waiting. Lillian stopped speaking to me altogether. She spent most nights at her boyfriend's place. When she did come home, she'd glance at me like I was contagious. One evening, I overheard her on the phone. "She's not sleeping. I think she's having some kind of breakdown. She keeps talking to the walls." It took everything in me not to scream. Maybe I was losing it. But how do you prove you're sane when no one believes you? That night I sat on the floor with my sketchbook, drawing the closet over and over. Each sketch looked different. Sometimes it was a mouth, sometimes an eye, sometimes a mirror. I fell asleep there, pencil still in hand. When I woke, Lillian was standing over me. "What are you doing?" she asked quietly. "Trying to understand." She sighed. "Serafina, you need help. I need someone to believe me." Her voice cracked. "Maybe you're the only one keeping this alive." That hit harder than anything the closet could do, because deep down, I feared she was right. The night before I left Ashmere Heights, the fog was thicker than I'd ever seen it. It wrapped the building in silence, swallowing the streetlights. Lillian had already moved out. She left a note that said only, "I hope you find peace." I stood alone in the living room, suitcase packed, sketchbook under my arm. My eyes drifted to the closet. The knob gleamed faintly in the dim light. I don't know why I did it. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I was tired of running. I reached out and turned the handle. It opened easily. Inside, nothing but emptiness. A small, dust-lined space that smelled faintly of cedar and old rain. No mugs, no blanket, no shadow. I laughed. I laughed until I cried, until my knees gave out and my breath came in short, shaking bursts. There had never been anything there. Just echoes, just the parts of me that had never been heard. When I finally stood, I whispered, "I believe you," to the quiet space inside the closet. And for the first time, the silence felt kind. The things we bury never truly disappear. They wait for us in the dark until we're brave enough to face them. Sometimes the most haunting voices are our own, echoing from the closets we've built inside our minds. And the real freedom doesn't come from escaping what scares us, but from learning to listen to ourselves and to the silence that finally answers back. When Jasmine moved out, I thought the apartment would finally feel lighter. Empty. Mine. I'd been waiting for that moment, finally free from the tension of living with someone who never acknowledged your presence except to complain. I pictured myself curling up on the couch with a book, leaving the blinds open, drinking coffee in silence. I had imagined it for weeks. I found a new tenant through an online ad. Carla. She seemed perfect. Too calm, too polished. Like a person who'd been rehearsing her life to avoid mistakes. Rent on time, polite, courteous, never asking too many questions. At first, I let my guard down. I even smiled when she said good morning, imagining a normal coexistence for once. But old instincts die hard. Years of family chaos had trained me to observe and survive, to note what people did with their hands, how they lingered, what they avoided saying. My childhood was a theater of whispers and accusations. My father slamming doors when angered, my mother critiquing everything with surgical precision, siblings using silence like a weapon. Those lessons didn't fade when I left home. They stayed embedded in my nerves, always on alert. It took only a few days for Carla to awaken that old tension. At first, it was small things. Dishes in the sink that weren't mine, a faint scent of perfume I didn't recognize, books slightly shifted on the shelf. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe I'd misplaced them. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. But the feeling in my stomach wouldn't lie. Something wasn't right. It was the camera that revealed the truth. I had installed a small, cheap security camera in the living room, a habit left over from years of paranoia. Watching the footage made my blood run cold. Carla had been in my apartment at 1:30 a.m., moving quietly, rearranging drawers, lingering in corners. She didn't touch anything obviously valuable. She just existed in my space. The way she moved was casual, almost serene, but every step carried a claim. I confronted her the next morning, my voice barely steady. You moved out. Why are you here?" Her smile was soft, almost innocent. "I missed it," she said. No apology, no remorse, just calm, deliberate intrusion. I changed the locks immediately, but the sense of violation lingered. I could no longer relax in my own home. Every creak, every shadow made my heart leap. Carla had taught me that the scariest people aren't loud, aggressive, or grotesque. They are quiet, patient. They slide in unnoticed, leaving you questioning your perception of safety. Days bled into nights. I stopped staying at the apartment for more than a few hours at a time. Friends' couches became temporary refuges, and I began to notice how every sound felt like a threat. The wind brushing against the windows, the neighbor's footsteps upstairs. My mind interpreted everything as a signal. I started leaving cameras in more places almost obsessively. Kitchen, hallway, even the bedroom. Carla had shown me that my sense of control was an illusion. Even with locks, alarms, and precautions, my sanctuary had been invaded. One evening, I saw movement in the footage. Carla, or someone like her, was just standing there staring into the camera. Not a glance toward anything specific, just a presence, as if testing my reaction. My hands shook as I hit pause. The rational part of my brain told me I was imagining it. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, hunted even in my own home. I began retracing steps from my childhood, recognizing patterns in my family's behavior mirrored in Carla. Silent entry, minor disturbances, calm smiles, testing boundaries, waiting for me to react. And I had reacted, not with courage but fear. I tried talking to neighbors. The woman next door, Mrs. Henderson, was nice enough, but her reassurance didn't reach me. "Everyone keeps to themselves," she said. "Maybe it's nothing." But I knew better. It wasn't nothing. It was someone learning how far they could push without being caught. I started leaving notes on doors, labeling personal items, even writing the time on the fridge to track movement. It was obsessive, yes, but the panic in my chest demanded action. Carla had opened a door I didn't know could be opened, into fear I thought I'd left behind. By the third week, my nights were consumed by watching the monitors, reviewing footage, memorizing every flicker of movement, every soft shadow. I became a student of intrusion, forced to learn the rhythms of paranoia, the calculus of being watched. I knew I had to face it, Avoidance only strengthens fear. So one afternoon, I waited for Carla at the apartment. Pretending to leave, I hid near the hallway, camera in hand, recording without her knowing. She arrived, keys in hand, humming softly. She walked through the living room, untouched by the camera, rearranging a stack of magazines just slightly, as if correcting a wrong only she could see. My chest tightened. "Carla," I said, finally stepping forward. She looked up slowly, calm, no trace of guilt. "I thought you might want to see the living room," she said, voice gentle, almost disarming. "Why are you here?" I demanded. "You don't live here anymore." She tilted her head, considering me. "I like it," she said simply. "It's comfortable. Familiar. Doesn't that make sense?" I wanted to scream, to shake her. But instead, I felt a cold realization. She didn't need to justify herself. The rules didn't apply to her. My personal space, my boundaries, my life, they were irrelevant. I called the police that night. They took a report, but there was little they could do. No forced entry. No clear intent beyond presence. The terror she invoked was invisible, a psychological violation, not a physical one. After the confrontation, I avoided the apartment entirely. I slept at friends' homes, at motels, anywhere I could feel safe. Even a walk outside brought anxiety. Someone might be watching. Every reflection, every shadow, was potentially Carla. I stopped trusting strangers easily. I stopped leaving personal items unattended. Grocery runs became calculated trips. Park close, move fast, check the surroundings. Each routine action carried a threat I had never imagined. Sleep became fractured. I dreamed of keys turning in locks, doors opening silently, footsteps pacing. My body carried tension I couldn't release, muscles tight, heart racing, mind always calculating. The apartment had been stolen from me, even when physically empty. I realized I had become the person I never wanted to be, hypervigilant, distrustful, haunted by the invisible. Carla had trained me, unwillingly, in the art of fear. Months passed. Carla didn't appear again, but her presence remained. I changed apartments, but the lessons traveled with me. Privacy is fragile. Trust is earned, not given. The world doesn't wait for trauma survivors to catch up. Danger is subtle, patient, and ordinary. Yet through all this, I began to reclaim myself. I learned to set boundaries firmly, to question situations calmly, and to trust my instincts without letting them consume me. Every lock, every camera, every careful glance became tools, not chains. I still check my doors. I still notice shadows. But now, I do so without terror, with awareness and respect for my own limits. I survived the intrusion. I survived the terror of the unseen. And in doing so, I realized that true safety comes not from avoiding fear, but from understanding and preparing for it. Trust is precious, privacy is sacred, and fear is a teacher. Danger often wears ordinary faces and moves silently through our lives, but awareness, instinct, and courage provide the tools to reclaim control. True strength comes from learning to live fully, even when the shadows linger. When my marriage ended, I told myself I'd finally escaped a life that had been quietly strangling me. Divorce wasn't liberation, it was survival. My ex-husband, Daniel, had this way of making every conversation feel like a test I was destined to fail. He didn't yell, didn't hit. He simply made me doubt my own mind. Every word I said was twisted. Every truth I spoke was somehow wrong. I began apologizing for things I hadn't done, feeling guilty for thoughts that weren't mine. When the papers were signed, I moved into a small 2-bedroom house at the edge of a quiet town called Linton Creek. It wasn't much. Peeling paint, squeaky floors, but it was mine. I could breathe again, or at least I wanted to. The rent was too high to manage alone, so I posted an ad for a roommate. I remember the morning Eric came to see the place. He stood on the porch, holding a grocery bag instead of luggage, smiling in this way that seemed rehearsed. "I really appreciate the chance," he said, his voice calm and almost too polite. He was clean-cut, soft-spoken, mid-30s, someone you'd never notice twice. The kind of man you'd feel safe around. We signed the lease that same afternoon. For the first few weeks, things were fine. Eric was tidy, quiet, respectful. He washed his dishes, paid rent early, even brought me coffee on weekends. I remember thinking, maybe good people still exist. After years of being accused of paranoia, I needed to believe in trust again. But small things started to feel off. I'd find the living room curtains drawn when I was sure I'd left them open. My bedroom door, always locked, sometimes sat just slightly ajar when I returned from work. I told myself it was exhaustion, my trauma replaying tricks. After all, Daniel had trained me to second-guess everything. Still, the air in the house started to change. It felt heavier at night, as though someone else's breathing shared the silence. The first night I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. I froze. Slow, deliberate steps, back and forth. I lay there holding my breath, eyes on the narrow crack under the door. A shadow drifted past. Twice. I wanted to believe it was the house settling, maybe Eric getting a glass of water, but the steps stopped right at my door and stayed there for nearly a minute. The sound of breathing, steady, calm, listening. I told myself not to move. If I stayed still, maybe it would pass. And when it finally did, I couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next morning, Eric was making breakfast as if nothing had happened. "You look tired," he said, smiling faintly. "Rough night?" I hesitated. "Did you get up last night?" He looked confused, maybe amused. "No. Why? You hear something?" I studied his face, searching for any flicker of guilt. Nothing, just calm, bland politeness. "I thought I heard footsteps," I said carefully. He shrugged. "Old houses make weird noises." That was it. No defensiveness, no over-explaining, just dismissal. The same kind of quiet control Daniel had perfected, where you start to wonder if maybe it really was in your head. For a while, I tried to convince myself of that. But then I started noticing new details. My shampoo running out faster than usual, the faint smell of my perfume in the hallway, though I only wore it when I went out. A hairbrush moved slightly from where I'd left it. Tiny, intimate signs that someone had been close. One night I stayed late at work just to test something. When I came home, the lamp in my room was on. I hadn't turned it on that morning. Eric was sitting on the couch, reading. "You get off early?" he asked, eyes never lifting from his book. "No," I said slowly. "Just wanted to come home." He nodded. "I made extra pasta if you're hungry." His tone was warm, almost brotherly, but his eyes didn't match. They were too still, too controlled. That night I locked my bedroom door for the first time. I told myself it was a precaution, nothing more. But locking the door didn't make the feeling go away. It only made the silence louder. Then came the muddy footprints. One morning, leading straight to my bed. My stomach turned cold. I called the locksmith that afternoon and changed the locks without telling Eric. That night, he knocked softly on my door. "I noticed the locks are new," he said through the wood. "Yeah," I replied. "Needed an upgrade." A long pause. Then, in a voice almost tender, "Good. Safety is important." When his footsteps faded, I sat awake till dawn, staring at the door, wishing I had the strength to leave. I needed evidence, something tangible to prove I wasn't losing my mind. So I bought a cheap motion sensor camera from a hardware store and set it up in the corner of my room facing the door. I told myself I was being smart, not paranoid. That first night I barely slept. Every creak made my pulse jump. But morning came quietly. The camera light blinked red, recording done. I made coffee before watching the footage, convincing myself it would be empty, that I'd overreacted again. When the video loaded, I almost dropped my mug. At 2:47 a.m., my bedroom door opened. Slowly, Eric stood in the doorway, motionless, watching me. He didn't move for 20 minutes. Then he smiled, barely, and left. I replayed it 3 times before my body caught up with my brain. I felt sick, violated. My skin crawled. That evening, I confronted him. "Eric," I said, holding my phone like a weapon. "We need to talk." He looked up from his notebook. "Sure." I hit play. The video played in silence except for the faint hum of the house. He didn't blink. When the clip ended, he simply said, "You walk loud too." For a second, I thought I misheard. But no. He smiled slightly like it was a shared secret. "You walk loud too," he repeated softly, then turned back to his writing. Something in me broke. I locked myself in my room, shaking, replaying his words in my head. That whisper, so casual, so intimate, felt like a violation worse than any physical harm, because it meant he didn't just invade my space, he enjoyed it. I called the police the next morning. They took my statement, copied the video, and said they'd look into it. But days passed with no update. Eric still lived there, still moved through the house like nothing had changed. He started leaving notes on the fridge. "Please remember to wash your cup. Don't forget to lock the door." Each note written in perfect, tidy handwriting. A mockery of civility. Sometimes he'd hum outside my room at night, a low, tuneless sound that made my stomach twist. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping. My hands trembled constantly. When the police finally searched his storage unit, what they found turned my fear into nausea. Hundreds of photos, me sleeping, cooking, reading, taken through cracks in the door, windows, even the vents, my toothbrush, my shoes, my bed. The officer said, "He's been watching you for months." They arrested him that afternoon, but the damage was done. That night I stayed at a hotel. I thought the silence would comfort me, but instead, it roared. Every sound felt like a footstep, every flicker of light like someone watching. Even after they told me Eric would be facing charges, I couldn't stop checking corners, mirrors, doors. My body refused to believe safety existed anymore, because it wasn't just Eric. It was Daniel. It was my father. It was every man who had taught me that silence was safer than speaking. Months later, I moved into a new apartment in another city. The windows faced the street, full of noise and light. No more darkness pressing in. I told myself this time would be different, but habits die hard. I still check the locks twice. Still sleep with my phone recording. Still wake at 3 a.m., heart pounding, waiting for footsteps that never come. Therapy helps, a little. My therapist says trauma lives in the body, that even when the danger is gone, your nerves don't know the difference. Sometimes I dream of Eric's voice, that whisper. "You walk loud, too." Other times I dream of Daniel saying, "You're overreacting." They blend together until I can't tell which fear belongs to which man. But there's progress. I've started talking back to the shadows. "Not this time," I say out loud when my mind starts spinning. "You don't get to live here anymore." It doesn't always work, but sometimes it does. And I think that's what healing looks like. Not forgetting, but surviving in spite of memory. Fear doesn't always come from monsters in the dark. Sometimes it comes from people who smile while taking your power piece by piece. But survival isn't silence. It's learning to speak even when your voice shakes. Because the real horror isn't being watched. It's believing you deserve to be. When I moved to the city, I was searching for stability, a quiet corner of life where I could finally breathe. I had spent years under my parents' strict scrutiny, where mistakes were never forgiven and love always came with strings. My father, a rigid surgeon, measured worth in precision and success, and my mother wielded perfection like a weapon. My siblings thrived in that environment, but I learned early to hide my panic, to perform flawlessly, to stay silent when the world felt like it was scrutinizing me. Those lessons became survival tools, though I never realized how vulnerable they made me to others until much later. So when I found the apartment on the third floor of a modest brick building in a quieter part of town, I thought I had found my sanctuary. It wasn't much: a small living room with peeling paint, a kitchen that smelled faintly of damp wood, and 2 bedrooms separated by a thin wall. But it was mine. And I wasn't alone. My roommate, Theo, was a medical student who had impressed me with his intelligence and calm demeanor over our initial phone call. From the first week, Theo's presence was almost soothing. He was quiet in the mornings, meticulous with his routines, and polite in our conversations. We shared meals occasionally, often talking about human behavior, psychology, and medical curiosities. He seemed harmless, intellectual, almost charming. But there was something subtle that unsettled me. An intensity behind his eyes, a precision that didn't belong to casual study. I brushed it off, telling myself it was just my imagination, leftover caution from years of parental oversight. I like to observe people quietly, to notice without being noticed. Perhaps I was simply projecting my own habits onto him. It wasn't until the second week that small oddities started to appear. At first they were minor. A sour smell in the kitchen, dishes left out longer than normal, milk curdled at the back of the fridge. When I mentioned it, Theo smiled calmly and said, "I'm conducting a personal study on the body's natural bacteria levels. It's completely harmless." I laughed nervously, though a sliver of unease settled in my chest. Later, I noticed his notebooks, full of meticulously drawn charts, observations, and lists about daily routines, meals, and reactions to various stimuli. I told myself he was ambitious, perhaps even brilliant. But when I found jars of hair collected from the bathroom drain and labeled by day, fear finally rooted itself in me. It wasn't just the hair. My toothbrush disappeared for a day and returned in a plastic bag labeled Day 14, Sample Collected. The room that had been my sanctuary now felt like a laboratory, and I was its unwitting subject. Every movement I made, every sound, even my hesitation when speaking, felt catalogued and scrutinized. Childhood memories I had buried, my mother's critique, my father's silent judgment, the sharp glances from my siblings, flared back at me, magnified 1,000-fold. When I confronted Theo, my voice shook despite my careful control. Why are you doing this?" He smiled, unnervingly calm, almost triumphant. "To understand human behavior. You consented the moment you moved here." A chill ran down my spine. He wasn't joking. And suddenly the lessons of my childhood, the constant performance, the silent observation, made sense in a new, terrifying way. I had survived years of subtle psychological testing at home, but Theo had taken it further. He didn't see boundaries, didn't see empathy, only observation and measurement. That night, I lay awake in my small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator, wondering how someone could be so calm while violating trust so completely. By morning, I had made a decision. I couldn't stay. The apartment that had promised freedom now held only fear. I spent the next morning packing quietly, leaving half my belongings behind. My hands trembled as I stacked clothes into a bag, carefully avoiding contact with anything that might be part of Theo's study. Every corner of the apartment seemed to breathe around me, a silent observer. As I packed, I tried to rationalize the situation. I wasn't imagining things. The jars, the notes, the toothbrush, these weren't pranks or quirks. This was deliberate. And yet, I felt trapped by the psychological weight of it. Theo had managed to touch the deepest nerve from my childhood, the part of me trained to comply, to hide panic, to suppress reaction. A week earlier, I had jokingly mentioned to a friend about moving in with someone like a mad scientist, and she laughed. I wanted to laugh now too, but the humor was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of violation. I remembered the night I first saw the labeled jars and realized he had been watching me for days, perhaps weeks, before I even noticed. The thought of how much he knew, The subtle changes in my expression, the brief flickers of hesitation, the way I fidgeted when anxious, made my stomach churn. He had studied me the way a biologist studies a specimen under a microscope. I was not a roommate. I was an experiment. When I confronted him, he had not even flinched. His smile was calm, patient, and he spoke with certainty. "You consented," he said. It echoed in my mind. Consent. Had I really consented by simply existing in his presence? The ambiguity was unbearable. I thought back to my childhood. My mother measuring success in numbers, grades, and behaviors. My father correcting every misstep, often in silence. Theo had mirrored that upbringing in its most terrifying form, without the familial love to soften it. This was pure observation, pure testing, stripped of compassion. By midday, I had loaded enough belongings into a borrowed car to leave immediately. Theo watched me pack, his expression unreadable, almost clinical. I avoided his gaze. Every glance, every reaction was being noted, and the thought made me feel both vulnerable and infuriated. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a surge of relief, but also a lingering terror. The apartment was empty now, but the traces of observation lingered like a ghost. My toothbrush, my personal routines, even my sleep patterns had been invaded. I drove to a friend's apartment without speaking, heart pounding, hands white on the steering wheel. Later that week, I saw Theo on a local news segment. His experiments at the university had led to his expulsion. He had been performing hygiene deprivation studies without consent. I felt a mix of relief and vindication, but also a creeping fear. My instincts had been right all along, yet the trauma remained, etched into my psyche. Even after moving out, the shadow of Theo's presence lingered. I couldn't stop checking my toothbrush, my personal items, my small apartment's locks. My home, once a refuge, now felt fragile. Every creak, every unexpected sound triggered memories of observation, of silent measurement. I avoided roommates, even close friends, for months. At work, I found myself watching everyone too carefully, analyzing subtle cues as though I were defending against another Theo. Paranoia had settled in, quiet but persistent. The lesson from my childhood, watch, comply, hide panic, had been resurrected, magnified, and now directed at a world that had no interest in my childhood traumas. Months later, I began therapy. I spoke openly about my childhood, about Theo, about the cumulative effect of living under constant observation. My therapist helped me separate instinct from fear, reality from lingering trauma. I realized that my sensitivity had kept me alive, that my instincts had been right. And yet, I had to learn to reclaim trust, to rebuild my sense of safety. A year later, I moved into a new apartment. Locks were reinforced, cameras installed, but most importantly, I reclaimed my routines and privacy. Theo's shadow remained a cautionary presence in my mind, but I learned that vigilance could coexist with normalcy. I allowed small trust back into my life, letting people close, but carefully, cautiously. I had survived, and the lesson was clear. Boundaries exist for a reason, trust must be earned, and fear, while natural, should not rule life forever. The story of Theo taught me that fear is often silent, subtle, and rooted in observation rather than overt aggression. True safety comes from recognizing boundaries, trusting instincts, and valuing consent and privacy. Trauma may linger, but awareness, vigilance, and self-respect are the tools to reclaim control over one's life. When I moved to Greystone Hollow, I thought I was finally starting over. The city smelled like wet pavement and coal dust, a mix of history and decay that clung to your clothes. I had gotten into a graduate program for psychology, a field that, ironically, I chose to understand people like my parents. My mother's silences were weapons, my father's tempers were storms, and I spent my childhood walking a tightrope between them. I learned early that the safest thing a person could do was stay quiet, stay small, and hope no one noticed. The apartment at Greystone Hollow was small but charming. Arched windows, creaky wooden floors, an ancient radiator that groaned like it was alive. I rented it with a man named Evan, another student, quiet and polite to the point of discomfort. His hair was always perfectly combed, his shirts crisp even when wrinkled. He smiled when spoken to but never asked questions, and his door was always locked, even when he was home. At first I respected it. After years of suffocating emotional exposure, privacy felt sacred. Maybe he just valued boundaries the way I did. But that feeling began to change the longer we lived together. It started with small things. My leftovers went missing. The milk carton would be nearly empty when I'd swear I hadn't used it. Then there were the sounds, soft, muffled voices in the middle of the night, laughter that seemed to come from the walls, the shower turning on at 3 a.m. when the house was supposed to be empty. I told myself it was the old plumbing, maybe thin walls, maybe the neighbors. But when you've grown up gaslit by the people who should have protected you, you stop trusting even your own senses. I didn't say anything to Evan. I just watched. Then came the smell. It started faint, like damp fabric. Within a week it became something worse, sweet and rotten, clinging to the hallway outside his locked door. Every time I passed, my stomach turned. When I finally asked him about it, he didn't look up from his desk. "It's probably the pipes," he said simply. "The building's old." I nodded, pretending to accept that, but something in his tone, too casual, too dismissive, made my chest tighten. I told myself not to push. I had learned long ago that confrontation never brought safety. But 2 nights later I heard it again. Footsteps above me, pacing. The ceiling creaked, dust sifting down. I stared up into the dark, my heart racing, and realized there was no second floor above our apartment. Only the crawl space. The smell grew worse over the next week. I could taste it in the air like spoiled meat. Evan barely came out of his room anymore. I'd hear his door click open late at night, soft movements, and sometimes, just before dawn, the faint hiss of a lighter, a quiet whispering voice. I started eating out more, spending longer at the university library, but even there I felt uneasy. My phone would buzz with blank messages, no sender, no text, just static. When I mentioned it to a classmate, she laughed. "Maybe your roommate's a ghost," she joked. That night, I dreamed someone was standing at the end of my bed, whispering my name. When I woke, my door was open. That was when I decided to act. The next day, when Evan left for class, I called the building maintenance office. My voice shook as I explained that there was a strong odor coming from the locked room. The man on the phone sighed. "Not the first complaint from that unit," he said. An hour later, 2 maintenance workers arrived with a key. I stood in the hallway, arms folded tightly across my chest, heart pounding as they turned the knob. The door opened easily. Inside there was no bed, no dresser, no clothes. Just a mattress on the floor surrounded by piles of empty food containers, a portable stove, and plastic bottles filled with water. Against the wall was a wooden panel, slightly ajar. Behind it, a small opening leading into the crawl space. The air was rank. My throat burned. One of the workers pulled out his flashlight and leaned in. "Jesus Christ," he muttered. "There's another mattress up here." Something inside me froze. That night I sat on the couch, trembling. Evan didn't come home. The landlord called me the next morning, voice tight. "Your roommate's been evicted. Don't worry, he won't be coming back." But that didn't make the apartment feel safer. If anything, it felt worse, like something had been disturbed and left unfinished. Days passed. I tried to move on, to study, to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was still there. Every creak in the ceiling made me jump. Every draft from the vent felt like breath. The landlord had locked the crawl space, but I still caught faint sounds at night. Shifting, scraping. I told myself it was rats, or wind, or stress. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, I came home to find the window above the couch open. I never opened it. There were muddy handprints on the sill, faint but visible, My body went cold. I called the police, but they found nothing. Old buildings attract drifters, the officer said, half apologetic. Just keep your windows locked. That night I slept on the floor by the door with a kitchen knife in my hand. When I told my mother about it over the phone, she sighed. You always overreact, Natalie. You need to stop imagining danger everywhere. It was the same tone she'd used when I was a child, when I told her about the noises in my closet, about Dad's quiet rages behind closed doors. I hung up before she could finish her sentence. I was done being told I was imagining things. A week later, while I was sketching by the window, I heard it again. A thud above me, followed by a faint cough. My pen fell from my hand. The landlord had changed the locks. The crawl space was supposed to be sealed. I climbed onto a chair and pressed my ear to the ceiling. Silence. Then another thud, closer this time. I called the landlord immediately. He didn't answer. I texted, "There's someone up there." No reply. Finally, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed onto the counter to reach the ceiling hatch. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the light. The latch came undone easily, as though it had never been locked at all. When I pushed the panel open, a gust of cold, foul air hit me, and there it was, the second mattress, filthy and torn, with piles of trash beside it. The smell was unbearable. No one was there, but the bedding was still warm. That was the last night I spent in that apartment. I moved out the next morning. The landlord refunded part of my deposit and avoided eye contact. He said the police had found signs of unauthorized occupancy in several crawl spaces across the building. No one knew for sure how many people had been living there, moving through walls and vents like ghosts of the forgotten. Months later, in my new apartment across town, I still wake at 3 a.m. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes I swear I hear movement in the vents. But the truth is, what haunts me most isn't the thought of someone living above me. It's the part of me that didn't speak up sooner. The part that learned silence from childhood and carried it into adulthood. I check locks twice now. I sleep with my shoes by the bed. I listen. Because I've learned that danger doesn't always knock. Sometimes it moves in quietly, eats your food, breathes your air, and waits for you to convince yourself it isn't real. Sometimes the walls we build for protection become the ones that trap us. Ignoring fear doesn't make it disappear. It only gives it space to grow. And in a world full of hidden rooms and quiet dangers, believing yourself is the first act of survival. When I first moved to Chicago, I told myself I was starting over. No more walking on eggshells. No more rooms that felt like interrogation chambers. No more pretending not to hear the way my mother's voice could cut glass, or my father's silence could flatten my chest. I was 24, fresh out of college, with one suitcase, a second-hand laptop, and a job offer that barely covered rent. But that didn't matter. I just wanted peace. The Craigslist ad read, "Room available, $600 a month, quiet neighborhood, no pets, no drama." It sounded like exactly what I needed. The man renting it out was named Vince. Mid-30s, calm voice on the phone, even offered to pick me up from the train station. When I first met him, he looked ordinary. Plain black hoodie, jeans, a short beard. The kind of guy you'd forget walking past on the street. That felt safe to me. Ordinary felt safe. The apartment itself was neat. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, open living space, lots of plants. I asked about the previous tenant, and Vince just said, she moved out suddenly, had family stuff. I didn't think much of it. I was too busy convincing myself that this was my reset button. The first few weeks were fine. Vince worked nights as a freelance investigator, or so he said. He paid rent in cash envelopes, cooked sometimes, and mostly kept to himself. When he was around, he was polite, borderline overly polite, always asking, "You feel safe here?" Or, "Everything okay with the locks?" It felt caring at first. After a childhood where no one asked how I felt, it was nice to be seen. Until the night I found the camera. It was late, I couldn't sleep. My ceiling light flickered. I stood on a chair to twist the bulb, and saw the faint red dot inside the smoke detector. I froze. A camera lens, tiny, hidden, pointed directly at my bed. I climbed down slowly, hands shaking. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it wasn't even his. But the next morning when I asked, "Hey, what's with the camera and the detector?" Vince didn't even flinch. He just said calmly, "It's for safety. Buildings had break-ins." "Then why is it in my room?" I asked. He smiled. "You can't be too careful." That's when something inside me, something old, the part of me that remembered every time I'd been gaslit as a kid, started to hum with warning. But I told myself not to overreact. I couldn't afford to move again, and I wanted to believe that I wasn't in danger. The longer I stayed, the smaller the apartment felt. I started noticing things, drawers slightly open when I swore I'd closed them, messages on my phone that disappeared before I could reread them, a faint smell of cologne in my room when I came home early. Every time I brought something up, Vince had an answer ready. "You must have imagined it," he'd say softly. "You've been stressed lately. You know, trauma can make people see patterns that aren't there." He said those words like he cared, like he was helping me see reason. And I hated that it worked. Then came the laundry incident. I caught him one evening standing near the washing machine, holding one of my shirts, just holding it, like he was studying the fabric. He looked up and smiled. "Some stains tell stories, you know?" "What does that even mean?" I asked, my voice tight. He shrugged. "Just an observation." That night I locked my bedroom door for the first time. The next morning the lock was broken. I started eating out more, staying at work late, pretending everything was fine. But the paranoia clung to me like smoke. One evening I came home to find my laptop open, my emails all unread. "I was updating your antivirus," Vince said. "You really should thank me." "Don't touch my stuff," I snapped. His expression hardened for the first time. "I'm trying to protect you," he said, voice low. "Someone's stalking you online." My stomach turned cold. "What are you talking about?" He stepped closer, phone in hand. "They've been watching you, sending messages. You think I don't see what they're doing? I'm the only one keeping you safe." I backed away slowly. "Show me the messages." He didn't. He just stared, eyes calm, voice steady. "You wouldn't understand." That night I barely slept. Every creak sounded like footsteps, every shadow like him standing at my door. I started planning my escape. I waited until he left for work. I packed quietly, just essentials, cash, and my laptop. But before I could reach the door, my phone buzzed. "Vince. You're leaving, aren't you?" My blood went cold. Cameras. There had to be more of them. I didn't respond. I just ran. Halfway down the stairwell, I heard his footsteps behind me. Calm, measured, like he wasn't even trying to hide. "You don't have to be afraid," he said softly. "I'm not the enemy." I kept running. The street outside felt like freedom, until I realized I didn't have anywhere to go. No family I trusted, no friends who wouldn't call me dramatic. So I checked into a cheap motel and shut my phone off. 2 days later, a detective called from a blocked number. "Miss, you rented a room from a man named Vincent Hale." My voice barely worked. "Yes. We've been investigating him for digital crimes, extortion, surveillance, identity theft. You might want to come in." At the station, they showed me photos of other tenants, women, all smiling in rooms that looked just like mine, all secretly filmed, all stalked. My stomach turned when I saw the file names. Client 01, Client 02. He'd been selling everything. They arrested Vince that week. I watched the news clip on my phone. Private investigator arrested for stalking and exploiting tenants. His mugshot looked almost peaceful, like a man who thought he'd done nothing wrong. The detective said I was lucky. Lucky I left when I did. Lucky my instincts kicked in. Lucky I had proof. But lucky didn't stop the nightmares. For months, Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the red glow of that hidden camera. I stopped trusting phones, mirrors, locks, anything. I tried therapy, but sitting in front of another stranger felt impossible. Every question sounded like control. Every gentle voice sounded like manipulation. It took a long time to realize that what scared me most wasn't Vince. It was how much of him reminded me of my past. The calm voice, the gaslighting, the way he made me doubt myself. Vince wasn't my first ghost. He was just the one that finally showed his face. A year later, I live in a different apartment, smaller, but mine. I still double-check the smoke detector. I still avoid Craigslist. I still hesitate before answering unknown numbers. But I'm learning. Sometimes healing isn't about forgetting. It's about learning which voices not to believe. Last week, my therapist asked, "Do you trust yourself now?" I thought about it. I thought about how my childhood taught me to doubt every instinct, every emotion, how it took a stranger's obsession to prove that my fear wasn't weakness. It was survival. "I'm getting there," I told her, "and that's enough." Outside, the Chicago wind cut through my jacket, sharp and cold but alive. I looked up at the sky, gray, restless, endless, and for the first time in years I didn't feel small. I just felt present. Watching, yes, but also watching over myself. Trust is powerful, but it can be dangerous when we give it to the wrong people. True safety begins not with walls or cameras, but with listening to our instincts, especially when others try to silence them. We are taught to be polite, to dismiss our fear, to doubt our inner voice. But that voice is often the first and only warning we get. Believe yourself. Because sometimes, survival is simply the act of trusting your own truth. When I first moved into the studio apartment on Davenport Hollow, I thought I was prepared for solitude. I had grown up in a home where silence was punishment and noise was power. My father's booming lectures, my mother's cold withdrawals, and my siblings' petty betrayals taught me to hide, observe, and fear. Independence had always seemed like a dream, somewhere I could exist without judgment or scrutiny. The apartment itself was modest, barely more than a box with a kitchenette and a bathroom. But I loved it. The windows overlooked a quiet street, and the small size made it easy to clean and maintain. I was ready for a fresh start. Trevor entered my life the day I signed the lease. He appeared calm, collected, and disturbingly self-assured. From the first handshake, I noticed his eyes, too sharp, almost predatory in their attention. He claimed he didn't need sleep. I laughed it off, thinking it was a joke, some quirky boast from a college kid pushing boundaries. But that evening he remained upright well past midnight, staring at the walls, earbuds in, eyes unfocused but alert. I approached him cautiously. "Trevor, seriously, you're going to collapse if you keep doing this." He tilted his head slowly, his expression unreadable. "Sleep is a weakness," he said softly. "That's when people are easiest to get to." I froze. There was no threat in his voice, only observation. But the way he said it made my chest tighten. My instincts screamed that this was a man who saw fear as a variable to measure. At first, I tried to normalize his habits. Maybe he was a night owl, a student with peculiar methods, someone who thrived on odd schedules. But I quickly realized it wasn't that simple. He didn't sleep. Ever. He would sit in the dark, motionless, sometimes humming quietly or scribbling in notebooks, and yet he noticed everything. How I breathed, how I shifted in my chair, how my eyes flicked to the door whenever the floorboards creaked. I became hyper-aware of my own behavior. Every movement I made seemed to be cataloged. Nights became unbearable. I would wake at 3 a.m. to find him crouched in a corner staring at me. I left lights on to signal boundaries, but it only seemed to amuse him, perhaps even challenge him. One night, I woke to a whisper inches from my ear. "You shouldn't sleep so much," he said softly, grinning. "It makes things easier." I bolted out of bed, heart pounding. barely remembering to grab my phone before fleeing. Trevor didn't follow. He didn't need to. The fear was already planted. The days after that night were worse than the encounter itself. I became a ghost in my own home. I tiptoed around the apartment, measured every gesture, and avoided sitting where he could see me. Conversations with him became tense, mechanical. "Can you maybe go to your room?" I asked cautiously one evening, trying to maintain a semblance of politeness. "Why?" he replied without emotion. "I'm just observing." I clenched my fists, remembering all those years of watching my father's face for signs of disapproval, my mother's eyes for silent withdrawal, my siblings' smirks when I stumbled. Trevor was like all of them, distilled into one unnerving figure. But unlike my family, I had no escape plan. He began subtle manipulations. Lights were slightly dimmed when I returned home. My coffee cup was moved an inch to the left. He hummed certain patterns at unpredictable times. The environment itself became a psychological trap, a constant reminder that I was never alone in my home. I tried talking to friends seeking reassurance. "He's just weird," one said. "He probably doesn't even realize he scares you." But I knew better. My instincts screamed that this was intentional. The presence of someone who never rested, who existed in the shadows observing silently, was unlike anything I had experienced, even in the volatile environment of my childhood. The turning point came when I noticed my toothbrush missing, then returned wrapped in a napkin with small notes scribbled on it. Day 3, reaction logged. My stomach lurched. This wasn't harmless eccentricity. This was an experiment, and I was the subject. By the 3rd week, I couldn't breathe in my own apartment. Every creak, every faint sound sent spikes of adrenaline through me. Trevor was always awake, always watching, and I began calculating his movements before I even walked into a room. One evening, I confronted him directly. "Trevor, what you're doing, it's not normal. You can't just watch people like this. You're violating boundaries." He smiled, calm, unnerving. "Boundaries exist to be tested. Fear is useful. It teaches. You should be grateful for the lesson." Grateful. The word hit me like a punch. This was my life he was turning into an experiment. The lessons of my childhood, silent observation, controlled panic, measured reactions, had prepared me for discipline, not predation. That night I packed hurriedly. My hands shook as I shoved clothes into a bag. My heart raced, not just with fear, but with the adrenaline of finally reclaiming control. I left most of my possessions behind, knowing that the apartment had been compromised and that my presence had fueled his study. When I returned 2 days later, the studio was empty. Trevor had vanished completely, leaving no trace, no bed, no clothing, no notebooks. It was as though he had never existed. The experience mirrored patterns from my childhood. Absence used as a tool, silence wielded to instill anxiety, and unpredictability shaping behavior. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he had simply left. But the uncertainty gnawed at me. Every shadow, every whisper in a quiet room became a potential observation. The trauma of being watched, of having my private life cataloged, lingered. Even months later, I found myself checking corners before sleeping, listening for sounds that weren't there, imagining eyes on me in every reflective surface. The lessons from my childhood, hyper-awareness, vigilance, had been amplified by an adult predator who mirrored the psychological patterns I had learned to survive. Time slowly helped, but only partially. Therapy and support from friends allowed me to process the fear, separating realistic threats from lingering paranoia. I moved into a new apartment, one where I could control my environment. Locks were reinforced, blinds replaced, routines adjusted. Yet I carried the memory of Trevor, of sleepless observation, of calculated fear, as a permanent caution. I learned that survival is not just physical, it's psychological. Awareness, vigilance, and boundaries are not weaknesses, they are tools to navigate a world where some people exploit others' vulnerabilities. The experience left a mark, yes, but also a lesson. Fear can exist silently, without a shout or a strike. The true terror is observation, the quiet invasion of trust. And surviving it requires not only fleeing, but learning to reclaim one's life with eyes open, instincts sharpened, and boundaries uncompromising. Fear doesn't always announce itself. Some threats are silent, subtle, and reflective of our own vulnerabilities. Trust instincts, protect boundaries, and value consent and privacy. Survival is not only escaping danger, it's reclaiming control over one's mind, space, and life. Back in my sophomore year, I thought Mallory was my best friend, the person who would always have my back. High school had forged our bond, two girls who shared secrets, playlists, and dreams of escaping to somewhere bigger. Rooming together in college seemed like a natural step, a continuation of that friendship, a bubble of trust I thought would protect me from the wider, harsher world. I grew up learning to navigate conditional love. My mother celebrated achievement but never affection. My father's anger was sudden and punishing, his silence worse than his shouts. My older sister thrived on subtle manipulation, leaving me to question my own instincts. Over time, I became a master of hiding hurt, swallowing fears, camouflaging vulnerability. College was supposed to be different. With Mallory, I allowed myself the illusion of safety. The first month was easy. We decorated the apartment together, shared groceries, binge-watched shows until late. I felt like I had found a corner of the world where I could finally breathe. Then I started dating. David, Mallory's ex. At first, it was innocent. Light flirting, long walks, coffee at the campus cafe. I assumed Mallory would see it as harmless. I was naive. Small disruptions began almost imperceptibly. A note on my desk. Nice choice. Written in a familiar hand but dripping with sarcasm. My phone would vanish for hours. When returned, it smelled faintly of perfume or had messages opened that I hadn't touched. Coffee spilled across my notes, by accident. I brushed them off, telling myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia grows when trust fractures, and soon the fractures were undeniable. One evening, I came home to find my textbooks arranged differently. A photo of me, asleep at my desk, slid neatly onto the table. My chest tightened, memories of childhood intrusions flashing through my mind, doors opening when I slept, whispers just beyond my hearing. My sanctuary had been violated again, this time by someone I trusted. I confronted Mallory in the kitchen. My hands shook as I held up my phone, showing the screenshots posted online. "You took something from me," she said, her voice calm, almost clinical. "So I'm taking everything from you." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. That night, when I lay in bed listening to the city hum beyond my window, I realized friendship could be a thin, dangerous veneer. Mallory had weaponized my vulnerabilities, exploiting patterns I had assumed only existed in my family. By the second month, the intimidation escalated. My car tires were slashed one morning outside the apartment. At first, I refused to connect it to Mallory. Denial is a convenient blanket. But the screenshots and her earlier threats were pieces of a puzzle I couldn't ignore. Fear began to seep into mundane routines, checking over my shoulder, triple-locking doors, retracing paths through campus to see if anyone had followed me. Mallory began leaving subtle reminders of her presence. My favorite coffee mug would appear on her side of the counter. Notes scrawled in my handwriting style would show up in my backpack. I started leaving things deliberately out of place, setting traps to see if they would be touched, and almost immediately my suspicions were confirmed. The psychological toll was heavier than any physical damage. I avoided my own apartment. Friends began noticing my jitteriness. "Are you okay?" one would ask. I couldn't explain it fully, how someone I trusted could dismantle my sense of safety so completely, how every step outside the apartment now felt like a negotiation with potential danger. The breaking point came late one night. I had dozed off on the couch, and when I woke, my bedroom door was cracked open, the lock tampered with. On the pillow lay a single photo of me sleeping. Every instinct screamed betrayal. Every childhood memory of being watched and punished surged forward. I had never felt this small, this exposed, this violated. The next day, I went to the police. I explained everything: the notes, the social media posts, the car vandalism, the broken locks. They took my statement seriously, but cautioned that proving intent could be difficult. Mallory denied everything, claiming jealousy and misunderstanding. But forensic evidence, fingerprints, photos, time-stamped screenshots, left no doubt. I waited outside my apartment for her arrival, heart hammering. When she stepped onto the porch, casual, smiling, she had a smug, almost victorious air. I held up the notebook I'd been keeping, the evidence meticulously documented. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, voice trembling. Her eyes glinted, cold and unrepentant. "Because it's fun," she said. "Because you thought you were safe. You should never assume someone else has your back." She was expelled from school, but the psychological damage lingered far longer than any disciplinary action could fix. I had learned that safety is fragile, and trust, especially trust extended to someone close, is a double-edged sword. I moved out of the apartment and changed routines, yet fear shadowed me like a second skin. Even in a new dorm, I double-checked locks, watched doors, questioned every casual gesture from new acquaintances. I documented unusual events in a notebook, a ritual that helped calm my panic but never fully erased the anxiety. Sleep was fractured. Every creak, every shadow, every whisper in the hall triggered a flashback. I began noticing patterns in others' behavior, small signs of manipulation or intrusion, and sometimes I reacted too quickly, calling friends unnecessarily, checking rooms twice, asking strangers questions that seemed odd. Yet each precaution reminded me that vigilance had saved me from further harm. I still saw Mallory in my mind, not physically, but as a cautionary figure, a representation of how easily trust can be exploited. Her actions had taught me an indelible lesson. The people closest to you can cause the deepest wounds. Months turned into years. The trauma faded, but lessons remained. I cultivated caution without letting fear dictate life. Friendships became more selective. I asked questions before trusting, observed before confiding. My apartment, once a trap, became a sanctuary again because I reasserted control. Locks, alarms, habits, but also mindset. I learned that safety is both physical and psychological. Sometimes I still pause before leaving for class, glance at the door, and feel a faint echo of the past. But now, I recognize it as awareness, not terror. The betrayal had shaped me, yes, but it had also strengthened me. I live cautiously, hyper-aware, but not paralyzed. The scars remain, reminders of how close trust and danger can coexist, but also of how resilience and vigilance can reclaim what was threatened. Betrayal can come from the people we trust most, exploiting vulnerabilities we thought were hidden. True safety and peace are not guaranteed, but they can be reclaimed through awareness, careful boundaries, and resilience. Trust wisely, but fear thoughtfully, and let experience guide, not dominate your life. I used to think silence was safety. Growing up, noise meant danger. Shouting slammed doors, my mother's cutting voice slicing through the house like a blade. She called it discipline, but really it was control. Every mistake I made, no matter how small, became a weapon she'd use later. If I forgot to wash a dish, I was lazy. If I questioned her tone, I was ungrateful. So I learned to stay quiet, to apologize before I was even accused. When I finally moved out at 26, it felt like I was stepping into air that didn't belong to me. The world felt too loud, too unstructured. I didn't know how to exist without someone watching, waiting for me to fail. I spent 2 years bouncing between tiny apartments and short-term roommates, always trying to find something that felt like peace. But peace was expensive, and loneliness was cheaper. That's when I found Maddie. through a housing app. Her message popped up on a Thursday afternoon. "Hey, I saw your listing. I'm looking for a quiet place, low drama. I'm super tidy and pay rent on time. Let me know if you're still looking." Something about the way she wrote, simple, friendly, unpretentious, made me respond right away. She showed up the next day to look at the place. She was maybe my age, late 20s, with shoulder-length auburn hair, and a smile that made you feel like you'd known her before. She carried a canvas tote and wore an oversized sweater that looked lived in. I remember thinking, she feels safe. She moved in 2 days later. The first week was easy. She was polite, kept her space clean, and even cooked dinner one night. Pasta with a creamy sauce she said she learned from her grandmother. We stayed up late, eating on the couch, talking about everything and nothing. She asked about my family, and when I said, "It's complicated," she didn't push. Just nodded and said, "Yeah, I get that." For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. 3 months passed like a soft blur. Maddie was easy to live with. She paid her share of bills early, watered my dying plants, and left me little notes on the fridge. "Grabbed more milk," or "Don't forget your lunch." She was funny in small ways. She'd dance around the kitchen with a wooden spoon as her mic, or sit on the porch in her pajama pants, sipping coffee and narrating the neighborhood gossip like we were in a sitcom. One night she said, "You know, you're different. Most people keep walls up. You just trust." I laughed awkwardly. "That's probably not a good thing." She smiled. "It's rare. Don't lose that." We became close, not best friends, but something warm and easy. I told her about my mother, about how I'd never really learned how to relax. She listened without judgment. Then one weekend she said she was visiting her family upstate. She packed a small duffel, hugged me goodbye, and promised to be back by Tuesday. Tuesday came and went. By Friday I started to worry. I texted her. No reply. I called. Straight to voicemail. I checked her Instagram. The account was gone. By Sunday I couldn't take it anymore. I knocked on her door. Silence. My hands were shaking as I turned the knob. Her room was empty. Completely empty. No clothes. No toiletries. Even the bedding was gone. I stood there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. Had she moved out without telling me? Why? Then I noticed something. A small cardboard box under her bed. Inside were fake IDs, printed screenshots of social media profiles, and a copy of my driver's license. I sat on her floor, numb, flipping through the contents of the box. There were ID cards under different names: Madeline Graves, Elena Ward, Hannah Collins, each with her photo, slightly altered hair, different birthdays. There were documents, bills, addresses, credit applications. And there, among them, was my information, my name, my number, my address. A chill ran through me so deep I could hear my pulse. I whispered, "Who the hell are you, Maddie?" I took everything to the police station the next morning. The officer on duty listened, nodding, jotting things down on a clipboard. When I showed him the fake IDs, his brows furrowed. "Looks like identity theft," he said. "You did the right thing coming here." They ran her name, Madison Hale, the name she'd given me, and nothing came up. It was a ghost identity. Days turned into weeks. They couldn't trace her. Every alias led to another dead end. One detective finally said, "Whoever she is, she's done this before. People like that, they reinvent themselves. New names, new cities, hard to catch." I changed my locks, closed my bank accounts. For weeks I slept with the light on. At night, I'd hear phantom footsteps, creaks that sounded too deliberate. I'd wake up and swear I smelled her perfume, that faint vanilla scent she always wore. Every noise felt like a warning. Months passed and I tried to rebuild my routine. I started therapy, trying to untangle the fear Maddie left behind. My therapist, a calm woman named Dr. Green, said something that stuck with me. "She didn't just steal your information, she stole your sense of safety. You need to reclaim that." But it wasn't easy. I started getting mail addressed to Madeline Graves, credit card offers, insurance letters, even a hospital bill. Each one felt like a ghost note, reminding me she still existed somewhere, maybe even watching. I called the bank to flag the accounts, but deep down, I knew she was still out there, wearing someone else's name. One night I dreamed she came back. She was sitting at our kitchen table, smiling. "You missed me," she said. "You needed me to teach you this." I woke up sweating. After that, I started checking locks 3 times before bed. I deleted my social media. I even moved to a new apartment across town, smaller, older, but quiet. Sometimes I'd think I saw her face in crowds, at the grocery store, at the bus stop. A familiar tilt of the head, a flash of auburn hair. My heart would leap, but when I looked again, it was never her. Still, the fear never fully left. It just learned how to sit quietly beside me. Years later, I can finally talk about it without shaking. I've rebuilt, cautiously, new friends, new boundaries. When people ask why I live alone, I just say, I prefer it that way. Sometimes, I reread the police report. They never found her. No trace, no closure. Just an open file and a name that never existed. I used to think Maddie was evil, a calculated manipulator who saw me as an easy mark. But the truth is, she was something worse. A mirror. She reflected every weakness I'd carried from childhood, my need to please, to trust too soon, to believe that kindness meant safety. My mother used to say, "You have to see people for what they are, not what you hope they'll be." I used to think that was her bitterness talking. Now I know it was her experience, because the truth is, Maddie wore the same kind of mask my mother did, the one that says, "You can trust me." And I wanted to believe it so badly that I didn't look closer. Even now, when I hear laughter from another apartment or smell that faint vanilla scent in a store, a part of me tenses. But I've learned something powerful. Vigilance doesn't mean fear, it means survival. When we give it too easily, it becomes currency for those who trade in deception. But when we learn to balance openness with awareness, we protect both our hearts and our sanity. Maddie taught me that evil doesn't always break down the door. Sometimes it's the person who holds it open with a smile. I never thought of myself as someone who needed roommates to feel secure. When I first left community college, I bounced between apartments and part-time jobs, always landing on my feet. But in 2017, Chicago rent was climbing faster than my paycheck at the print shop could keep up with. So when my old classmates Eric and Melissa invited me to split a top-floor brownstone on North Sheffield Avenue, I said yes. David, a guy I knew through them, rounded out the trio. We were young professionals, barely out of school, scraping by but trying to play the part of adults. The brownstone was worn down but charming in its own crooked way. The stairwell smelled faintly of mildew after rain, and the radiators clanked like restless ghosts in winter. But we had space, a tiny deck with a view of the L tracks, and enough room to breathe. Rent was steep, though, so we posted an ad online for a 4th roommate. That's how Clara came into our lives. She seemed harmless enough when she arrived at our interview. 25, art student, messy blonde hair tucked under a knit beanie, clutching a portfolio case like it was armor. Her voice was soft, apologetic. "I just need a quiet place to focus," she said. She admitted her parents had cut her off, but Melissa, who carried her own scars from family rejection, was instantly sympathetic. Clara signed the lease 2 days later. At first, she was quiet to the point of invisibility. She spent hours sketching at the kitchen table, headphones in, as if she lived in another orbit. We welcomed the calm. In a house with 4 adults, silence was a gift. But small cracks appeared quickly. Dishes stacked up in the sink. Ashtrays appeared, even though smoking was forbidden inside. One night, Eric mentioned it, trying to be diplomatic. "Hey, could you maybe crack a window if you're gonna smoke?" Clara didn't blink. She just said, "I don't smoke." That answer stuck with me. Not because she denied it, People lie about smoking all the time, but because her face was utterly blank, like she truly believed her words even as the smell lingered on her clothes. It was the first moment I wondered if Clara was playing a different game than the rest of us. By November, she had a boyfriend, Ryan. He showed up one Friday night without introduction, lanky, hollow-eyed, chewing his fingernails raw. He barely spoke, just flopped on the couch and flipped channels while Clara sat beside him sketching in silence. He unnerved me instantly. One morning I found him in the kitchen staring at a family photo I'd left on the counter. He smirked and said, "You look different in pictures. Softer. Vulnerable." I laughed it off because I didn't know what else to do, but it chilled me. It was the first time I realized Clara hadn't come alone. Things shifted after Ryan became a regular presence. He was never officially living with us, but he was always there. His jacket slung over chairs, his boots by the door, his strange energy seeping into the house. The dynamic we had built with Clara, fragile as it was, collapsed into something harder to navigate. We began losing things. At first, it was little items. A watch David had since high school, a pair of earbuds Eric swore he left on the counter, Melissa's favorite sweater. We teased each other about being scatterbrained, but then Melissa's hairbrush turned up under Clara's bed when she helped her look for a phone charger. Clara laughed, a stiff, robotic laugh, and said she must have borrowed it. Her face stretched into a smile, but her eyes were wrong. The atmosphere grew heavier. Nights were the worst. I'd hear faint scratching sounds from Clara's room, like nails dragging against drywall. Melissa once swore she heard whispering through Clara's door, but when she pressed her ear to listen, it stopped instantly. Her sketchbooks, once filled with portraits and abstract shapes, turned darker. Bound figures with hollow eyes, shadowy faces peering around doors. When I asked about them, Clara's only answer was, "Art is supposed to reflect reality." The way she said reality lodged itself in my chest. One December night, the air was sharp with cold, and the L roared outside. I woke to a scraping noise, heavy and deliberate. I cracked my door and found Clara barefoot in the hall, dragging my dresser into the hallway with startling strength. Her eyes were wide, almost feverish. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered. She froze, then slowly pushed the dresser back inside. "I'm just rearranging." She walked past me as if nothing had happened. I locked my door and sat awake till dawn, adrenaline buzzing under my skin. The next morning, a kitchen knife lay on the floor outside my bedroom door. Nobody admitted leaving it there. That night, Melissa finally confronted her. "Clara, this has to stop. You're scaring us." Clara looked up from her sketchbook, her voice flat as stone. "You'll understand when it happens." From then on, paranoia ruled the house. Eric and I started sleeping with our doors locked. Melissa whispered about moving out, but David reminded us the lease tied us down. Every creak of the radiators felt like a warning. Clara and Ryan were inseparable. Sometimes we'd wake to find him sitting in the living room, TV muted, staring into the dark. Once, I caught him rifling through our mail. When I called him out, he just grinned and said, "Curiosity keeps me alive." I started avoiding the apartment altogether, lingering at the shop or nursing beers at a dive bar until closing. But the fear followed me home. One evening, David pulled me aside, pale and shaken. He had found one of Clara's sketchbook pages tucked into his pillowcase. 3 figures tied to chairs, their faces eerily resembling us. We argued about calling the landlord, even the police. But what could we say? Our roommate draws creepy art and moved a dresser once. It didn't feel like enough. Instead, we agreed to watch each other's backs, a loose pact born of fear. December bled into winter's darkest stretch. Then everything erupted. One night, flashing red and blue lights lit up the street. Police banged on our door, shouting Clara's name. We huddled in the kitchen as officers stormed upstairs. Minutes later, Clara and Ryan were in handcuffs. They had been tied to a string of burglaries across the neighborhood. Electronics, jewelry, personal documents. The stolen items? Many of them were under Clara's bed. She cried as they dragged her down the stairs. But when her eyes met mine, the tears stopped. She smiled, faint and deliberate, like she had known this was coming all along. Relief came slow. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. We packed Clara's things into boxes and shoved them near the door. Melissa joked nervously about burning sage. David blasted music while he cleaned the kitchen, humming like he hadn't in weeks. But relief has a half-life. I couldn't shake the image of Clara's smile as the cops led her away. 2 weeks later, David moved into a new place. He said he needed distance and none of us blamed him. That's when he found the letter. It was slid under his new apartment door, a plain envelope with no return address. Inside was a torn page from one of Clara's sketchbooks, 3 figures tied to chairs in a dark basement. Our names scribbled underneath. David called us in a panic. Melissa came over, clutching her phone like a lifeline. We sat on his bare floor staring at the page. The shading, the rope, the blank eyes. It was her hand. There was no question. We reported it to the police, but they shrugged. Clara had already been charged. They said she couldn't contact us directly, but a drawing? No threat they could act on. Still, I taped my windows shut that night. I pushed a chair under my doorknob. My chest tightened whenever the L roared past, as if the noise was a signal I couldn't decipher. I'd always believed fear faded with distance, but Clara taught me the opposite. Sometimes it follows you, silent and patient, like a shadow waiting for the right light. Months passed. Life trudged forward in small, shaky steps. Eric took a new job and left the city. Melissa started therapy and stopped answering texts as often. David changed his number twice. I stayed, though, in Chicago, because running felt like letting Clara win. Sometimes I'd walk by the old brownstone. New tenants had moved in, string lights in the window, laughter spilling out onto the street. I wondered if they ever felt what we felt, that crawling sense of something rotten under the floorboards. I never saw Clara again, though sometimes, when the L screeches past in the dead of night, I swear I hear her voice, whispering that same phrase. You'll understand when it happens. I think about her smile, the knives, the drawings, and I wonder if Clara ever really wanted to be an artist, or if she was just documenting the world as she intended to shape it. We take for granted that the people we let into our homes share our same sense of boundaries and decency. But the truth is darker. Some people carry storms inside them, and when those storms break, they pull everyone in the house into the flood. The lesson isn't to live in fear, but to listen when something feels wrong, to act when small red flags start waving, and to never ignore your instinct when safety is on the line. Because sometimes survival isn't about being brave. It's about knowing when to walk away. I came to Seattle chasing the illusion of a fresh start. Back home in Germany, I had studied hard, worked odd jobs, and told myself that if I pushed through, life would open up. By 2019, I was 27 and had already accumulated debt from studying abroad. My job at a cafe in Capitol Hill barely kept me afloat, and when my hours were cut after the holidays, I found myself staring at rent notices I couldn't possibly cover. Seattle wasn't forgiving. Studios were running close to $1,000 for cramped boxes with peeling paint. I was desperate, scanning Craigslist every night until my eyes burned. That's when I found it. A room on East Pine Street for $375. Too good to be true. The ad was simple. Furnished room, utilities included, female tenant seeking quiet roommate. When I knocked, the woman who answered introduced herself as Elena. She was in her early 30s, tall, her dark hair pulled into a braid so tight it looked painful. Her accent was heavy, Hungarian maybe, though she didn't elaborate. The apartment was stripped bare with only a sagging couch, a single lamp buzzing in the corner, and blinds drawn against the gray light outside. She extended her hand. Her grip was firm enough to make me flinch. I like quiet, she said. If you like quiet too, this will work. Her eyes lingered on me in a way that made my chest tighten. but 375 silenced any doubts. I signed on the spot. The first week passed in a blur of relief. Elena was polite but distant. She cooked odd stews that filled the air with thick spices I couldn't name, and she spent most of her time behind her bedroom door, typing on an old laptop that clattered like a machine gun. I figured I'd landed in the ideal setup. A roommate who kept to herself, bills I could actually afford, and a roof that didn't leak. But good deals don't stay good for long. It started small. One evening, Elena knocked on my door, holding a greasy pizza box. "Welcome you," she said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. At first, I thought she was trying to be friendly. We sat on my bed eating slices in silence until she asked, Do you lock your bedroom?" The question startled me. No. Should I?" She tilted her head. "Some people lock doors because they talk in their sleep. Some people give away secrets without knowing it." I laughed nervously. "I don't talk in my sleep." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Good. Secrets stay safest when mouths stay closed." She asked if my family knew where I lived. When I turned the question back on her, she froze. After a long pause, she muttered something about a brother who didn't make it past his 20s. Then she excused herself, leaving the half-eaten pizza behind. From then on, her compliments grew sharper, more unsettling. "You have the posture of a soldier," she said once, staring at me across the kitchen. "Soldiers always survive longest." Another time she studied my hands for so long I tucked them into my pockets. "Almost identical to him," she whispered. I never asked who she meant. By February, the apartment began to feel less like a safe place and more like a stage I couldn't step off. At night, I'd hear high-pitched giggles drifting through the walls, childlike and eerie. The first time I laughed it off, telling myself it was the neighbors. But when I asked Elena about it, she didn't even blink. "Maybe the pipes laugh in this building," she said. "Old pipes do strange things." I started locking my door after that. Seattle winters cut to the bone, the rain a steady whisper against the windows. One stormy night, Elena appeared in the kitchen, her face pale under the flickering light. She poured herself a glass of water and stared at me like she'd been waiting. "My ex thought leaving me would make him safe," she said suddenly. Her voice was calm, almost clinical. "But you can't just walk away from people like me." I tried to keep my tone light. "Breakups are hard, I guess." Her eyes fixed on mine, unblinking. "Sometimes love needs violence. Otherwise, it isn't real." I stood there frozen, holding my coffee mug like a shield. She walked past me without another word, retreating to her room. The door closed softly and I felt my knees go weak. The following week, I woke to a sound that prickled every nerve in my body. Scraping, steady, and deliberate. Through the narrow crack of my bedroom door, I saw her dragging my dresser away from the wall, her face expressionless, movements purposeful. "What the hell are you doing?" My voice cracked. She looked up slowly. "I'm just rearranging. You'll see." Then she pushed the dresser back into place as though nothing had happened and padded down the hall barefoot. The next morning, a kitchen knife lay neatly on the floor outside my door. When I confronted her later, my voice shook. "Did you put that knife there?" She tilted her head, eyes gleaming. "Maybe you dreamt it. Dreams feel real, don't they?" That was the moment I realized I had to leave. I told her I had to move out for family reasons. My mother was sick, I said. My father needed me. Lies rolled off my tongue because the truth felt too dangerous to speak. She didn't question me. Instead, she hugged me. Her body was rigid, her lips close to my ear. "You'll return," she whispered. "They all return." I packed in one frantic night, shoving clothes into garbage bags and abandoning anything too heavy to carry. 2 days later, I dragged my belongings into a dingy studio across town. The place smelled of mold and the plumbing rattled, but I could breathe again. At least I thought I could. The first message came a week later from an unknown number. "I still hear you breathing at night." I stared at the screen until my hands shook. Then another message arrived. "The dresser looks better where I placed it." I changed my number. For a while, the silence tricked me into believing it was over. But fear makes you listen differently. Every knock at the door, every creak in the hallway set my heart racing. Then, at 3:15 one morning, my phone buzzed again. A new number. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The image was blurry, but unmistakable. It was my new apartment door. Sleep became impossible after that. I pushed a chair under the knob, taped the windows shut, and left the lights burning until dawn. I told myself it was paranoia, that maybe a prankster had snapped the photo. But deep down, I knew. Sometimes I'd pass a tall figure on the street, bundled in a coat, and my stomach would drop. I never saw her face, but I didn't need to. The presence was enough. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? My old roommate sends me creepy texts and maybe took a picture of my door. Without proof, they'd tell me to block the numbers and move on. Instead, I carried the fear with me. At work, I jumped every time the bell above the cafe door jingled. On the bus, I scanned every seat for her silhouette. At home, I listened to the silence until I thought I could hear her breathing through the walls again. Seattle carried on as if nothing had happened. The city glittered with neon signs, the bars pulsed with music, and the rain kept falling. But my world had shrunk to survival, making it through one day without seeing her face, without hearing her voice whisper in the dark. I don't know if Elena is still out there watching. I only know that cheap rent came at a cost I'm still paying. Sometimes desperation blinds us to danger. We convince ourselves that a bargain is worth the risk, that silence equals safety, that strange behavior can be excused if the rent is low enough. But safety isn't measured in dollars. The people we share walls with shape our lives as much as any lease or paycheck. The lesson is simple, but vital. Trust your instincts. When something feels wrong, it probably is. No discount, no convenience, no false sense of security is worth sacrificing your peace of mind. When I boarded the plane to Denver in the summer of 2015, I thought I was finally putting distance between myself and everything I wanted to forget. The breakup in Prague had gutted me, leaving behind a version of myself I barely recognized. My friends told me Denver was cheaper, friendlier, a place where someone like me could work remotely and slowly put her life back together. I wasn't sure I believed them, but I needed a change, and change felt safer when it was wrapped in miles of distance. I found the townhouse through Craigslist after weeks of panicked searching. The rent was $420 a month, which was absurdly low compared to anything else near Colfax Avenue. I told myself not to question it too much. A lifeline is still a lifeline even if it looks frayed. Natalie Fisher opened the door when I arrived. She was in her early 30s, short blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears, her posture perfectly straight. "You must be Sophia," she said softly, her voice carrying an accent I couldn't place right away. "Swiss," she explained later. She said she was a part-time caregiver, though she never seemed to leave the house. Inside, the townhouse was unnervingly bare. The curtains were always drawn, blocking out the Colorado sun. The furniture looked mismatched, secondhand, with the only striking feature being a corkboard covering one wall of the living room. It was littered with pinned notes, magazine clippings, and photographs. "My inspiration wall," she called it. I smiled politely but felt an unease I didn't want to name. That first week she was kind in her own quiet way. Every evening she brewed tea, offering me a steaming cup without fail. We talked about travel, about art, about why we had both ended up in this city. I wanted to believe I had stumbled into a peaceful situation after months of chaos. For a little while I let myself believe it, but comfort has a way of wearing thin, and soon the cracks started to show. It was during one of our tea nights that she said it. We were sitting at the small kitchen table, steam fogging the air between us when she leaned forward. "You twist your hair when you lie. You've done it since childhood, haven't you?" I froze, mid-sip. I didn't remember telling her that. In fact, I wasn't sure I had ever told anyone. "How would you know that?" I asked. She smiled, tilting her head. Some things are easy to see. After that, I started noticing how much she remembered, what foods I preferred, the way I set my alarm, the songs I hummed while cooking. At first, I brushed it off as harmless observation. Some people are just perceptive, I told myself. But then the texts started. Anonymous numbers, short messages, pretty dress today. You hum when you cook spaghetti. The red scarf suits you best. These weren't things strangers on the street could notice. They were private details, visible only within the walls of the townhouse. I wanted to believe it was a prank, some friend messing with me from back home. But the pit in my stomach told me otherwise. The worst moment came late one night. I walked into the kitchen for a glass of water and found Natalie seated at the table, flipping through a photo album. My photo album. The one I kept locked in my suitcase, filled with old family pictures from Croatia. "What are you doing with that?" My voice rose, trembling. She didn't flinch. "I wanted to know you better," she said calmly, tracing a finger over my father's face in one of the pictures. I yanked the album from her hands and ran back to my room, locking the door behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. After that, things shifted. She began leaving gifts for me. A silk scarf in my favorite color draped across my bed. A bottle of perfume identical to the one my ex had once given me. A sketch taped to my door of me sleeping, my face peaceful, drawn in delicate pencil strokes. I confronted her one evening, scarf in hand. "Did you put this in my room?" Her eyes softened in a way that chilled me more than anger would have. "You don't have to be afraid," she whispered. "I'm the only one who will ever understand you." From that point on, the house never felt silent. I'd hear creaks in the hallway outside my door at night as if someone were pacing. Sometimes I woke to humming. Not just any humming. My humming. The exact tune I often caught myself repeating while cooking, now echoing faintly from her room. I thought about leaving, but where would I go? Rent was crushing me already, and part of me kept second-guessing. Maybe I was paranoid. Maybe she was lonely and eccentric, not dangerous. Then I found the scrapbook. It was hidden behind a stack of magazines in the living room. At first glance, it looked harmless. Patterned paper, carefully glued pages. But when I opened it, my blood ran cold. Every page held photoshopped images of my face. My face pasted onto strangers' bodies, some naked, some tied up, others smiling eerily. Around the edges, words were scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Finally together. Forever, even if she runs." I dropped it like it had burned me. I didn't know who else to turn to, so I called my older brother back in Croatia. Over video chat, I showed him the scrapbook. His face darkened instantly. "You need to go to the police right now," he said. "Don't wait, Sophie. This is dangerous." The next morning, I did. 2 officers came to the townhouse, their expressions cautious as I explained everything. They flipped through the scrapbook, but Natalie stood in the corner, her face perfectly calm. "She's unstable," Natalie said evenly, pointing at me. "She's imagining things." The officers couldn't charge her with anything. The photos weren't illegal, just disturbing. They warned her to stay away from me, then left. The whole time she stood there watching me, her smile as thin as a razor. I knew I couldn't stay. Within 48 hours, I packed what I could and crashed on a coworker's couch. I left furniture, clothes, even my grandmother's quilt behind. None of it mattered compared to getting out alive. But the escape didn't end the nightmare. A week later, I was in a new apartment, smaller but safer, or so I thought. Then I found the first note slid under my door. "The scarf looks better on you when you sleep." I tore it up, told myself it was coincidence, a sick prank by someone in the building. Then came the second. "Don't try to hide. I've always found you." I stopped sleeping after that. Every sound outside my window, every footstep in the hall made my heart hammer. I thought about calling the police again, but what could I show them? Scraps of paper with handwriting that meant nothing to anyone but me. Denver was alive with summer, music pouring out of bars, the air warm and electric. But my world had shrunk to a single fear. That she was still out there watching, waiting, convinced we were bound together by something only she understood. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake to the sound of humming in the dark. My own humming, carried back to me like a memory that refuses to let go. When you share a home with someone, you're sharing more than walls. You're handing over access to your routines, your habits, your vulnerabilities. It's easy to ignore the warning signs to convince yourself that eccentric behavior is harmless because moving is hard, or because you don't want to make waves. But safety demands listening to your instincts. When someone crosses boundaries again and again, it isn't eccentricity, it's danger. The moral is simple: trust the unease in your gut. Protecting your peace and safety is worth more than rent, comfort, or convenience. Back in 2012, I was 25 and desperate. I had just landed a job at a small marketing firm in downtown Philadelphia. The pay was barely enough to keep me afloat, and student loans kept nipping at my heels. I knew I couldn't afford my own place, so I did what every broke 20-something did at the time. I scrolled Craigslist, refreshing listings until something cheap popped up. That's how I found 312 Willowbrook Avenue, a narrow row house tucked into a quiet neighborhood. The ad promised a room for $400 a month. It sounded too good to be true, but when you're drowning, you don't question the rope thrown your way. The house belonged to a woman named Kira Vogel. She was 28, from Austria, and the kind of person who seemed to suck the air out of the room the moment you walked in. Her jet black hair was tied in a messy bun, her eyes sharp, her smile thin. "I don't like boring people," she told me during the tour. "If you're boring, don't stay." I laughed nervously. I figured she was joking, though part of me knew she wasn't. The house itself had an unsettling feel. Beige walls, old wood floors that creaked like they were complaining, and a faint chemical smell, bleach maybe, that never seemed to go away. Most of the rooms were sparse, like no one had really lived in them for years. Kira's bedroom door was always locked, but sometimes she left it cracked. I'd catch glimpses of odd details: photographs turned face down, notebooks stacked with military neatness, and a baseball bat leaning against the bed frame. Still, the rent was cheap, and she wasn't openly hostile. For the first few weeks, I told myself it would work out. I had my little bedroom, my job, and the sense that maybe I was finally getting my life on track. But living with Kira was like walking on ice you couldn't see through. Every step felt fine until it suddenly didn't. At first, she was oddly welcoming. Kira cooked late at night, filling the kitchen with the smell of garlic and paprika. Sometimes she'd knock on my door and invite me to join. Over cheap wine, she'd tell stories about Vienna, childhood memories, old friends, strange adventures that didn't always add up. One night she leaned across the table, eyes glinting, and said, "I can read people better than they can read themselves." I wasn't sure if it was confidence or a warning. Her moods shifted without warning. One night she'd laugh loud, almost charming, leaning close as though we were conspirators. The next, she'd slam doors, mutter in German under her breath, and accuse me of staring at her things. I tried to keep my head down, but she had a way of pulling me in. I came home from work one evening to find my bedroom door wide open. My laptop sat on my bed, screen glowing, though I was certain I'd shut it before leaving. "Did you go into my room?" I asked. "Maybe you forgot," she said flatly. "People forget things when they're stressed." Another time I caught her scrolling through my phone on the couch. She didn't look guilty at all. "I just wanted to know who you talked to," she said, smiling faintly. "You don't seem close to your family. That makes us closer, doesn't it?" Her words lingered longer than they should have. I started locking my door whenever I left the house. But even then, I couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more about me than anyone should. Things grew worse when Trevor showed up. Trevor Hansen was Kira's boyfriend, if you could call him that. Early 30s, tall, built like someone who'd spent years in gyms and bars instead of classrooms. Tattoos snaked down his arms, and his eyes always had that restless, mean shine. At first, he didn't say much. He'd lounge in the living room watching TV or drinking beer, smirking whenever I walked past. But his presence filled the house with a weight I couldn't ignore. One night I came home late from work, tired and ready to collapse. The house was dark except for a faint glow from the living room. Trevor sat there in the shadows, waiting. "She says you don't trust her," he whispered, his voice low and almost playful. "That's a dangerous mistake." I didn't answer. I just walked past, heart pounding, locking my bedroom door behind me. After that, Kira began showing up at my door late at night. She'd knock softly and ask questions that made my skin crawl. "Do you ever dream of being trapped? If you disappeared, who would notice first? Would you defend yourself or would you just let it happen?" Her eyes stayed fixed on mine whenever I answered, like she was testing me, like my words mattered less than my reaction. By May, I started sleeping with my door locked every night. Still, I'd wake to faint scratching sounds outside like nails dragging against wood. One morning, after oversleeping, I found a note slipped under the door in messy handwriting. "Don't keep me waiting again." I never saw who left it. The breaking point came in June. I was at my desk when my phone buzzed with a text from Kira. "Fairhill Park, 10 p.m. I need to explain everything." I should have ignored it. Every instinct told me not to go. But curiosity has a way of muting fear, and a part of me worried about what might happen if I didn't show. The park was nearly empty when I arrived. Streetlights flickered, insects buzzing in the muggy air. I sat at the picnic table she'd mentioned, waiting, my nerves stretched thin. 10 minutes passed. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Before I could turn, someone tackled me to the ground. A masked man, heavy and fast. Fists and boots rained down, and I felt the sharp sting of something metallic pressing into my ribs. My wallet, phone, and keys were ripped away. When the man fled, I staggered to my feet, dazed and bleeding. I stumbled to a nearby house where a woman called the police. Officers arrived, asked questions, pieced things together. The attacker wasn't random. It was Trevor. He'd been waiting for me. And Kira? She had given him my schedule, told him where I'd be, even handed over details to make the attack easier. When officers confronted her, she didn't deny it. She looked straight at them and said, watching me, he needed to be reminded of his place. Trevor was arrested. Kira wasn't. When I returned to the house to pack my things, Kira was there. Calm, quiet, as if nothing had happened. She leaned in the doorway while I stuffed clothes into bags, her voice low and steady. "You'll miss me. Nobody ever forgets me." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My hands shook as I zipped the last bag and carried it out. I didn't look back. Within days, I found another apartment across town. It was smaller, more expensive, but it had locks I trusted. I told no one my schedule. I avoided parks, avoided late-night walks, avoided anything that reminded me of that night. But the fear followed me anyway. Every creak of a floorboard, every late knock on a neighbor's door, every shadow lingering too long in the streetlight made my chest tighten. I never saw Kira again, but I never really escaped her either. Years later, I still catch myself double-checking locks, staring too long at strangers' faces, waiting for the familiar chill of recognition. Because Kira was right about one thing. Nobody forgets her. Trust is fragile, and sharing a home means sharing pieces of yourself you don't even realize you're giving away. When someone crosses boundaries, it's easy to dismiss it as eccentricity or convince yourself you're overreacting. But ignoring those small warnings lets danger grow unchecked. The lesson is simple. Listen to your instincts, protect your boundaries, and don't stay in a place where fear lives in the walls. Peace of mind will always be worth more than cheap rent. I never thought Houston would be home, not even for a year. After graduating from community college in San Antonio, I figured I'd land something steady, maybe an apprenticeship that would turn into a full-time gig. Instead, by the fall of 2017, I found myself working endless hours at a mechanic shop off Washington Avenue, trying to stretch each paycheck far enough to cover food, gas, and rent. Houston was bigger, louder, and more chaotic than I expected, and though I liked the work, Grease under my fingernails, the clank of tools, the satisfaction of fixing engines. I couldn't ignore the emptiness in my checking account. Living alone wasn't an option. I scrolled through forums and rental listings every night, looking for something cheap enough not to drown me. Most of the places were scams, half-finished houses, or too far from downtown to be worth the commute. Then one evening, I found a post on a local housing forum. Room available, 1849 Magnolia Street, $375 a month, utilities included. It seemed too good to be true. I clicked the link and saw a single blurry photo of a duplex with peeling paint, and below it, the name, Akira. I called the number the next day. "Hi, this is Akira," the voice said. Polite, soft, with the faintest trace of something I couldn't place. "Hey, I'm Diego. I saw your listing for the room. Is it still available?" "Yes. You can come by tonight if you like." The duplex sat on a quiet street of sagging porches and cracked sidewalks. It wasn't pretty, but for $375 I didn't expect pretty. Akira answered the door barefoot, wearing paint-stained jeans and a faded white t-shirt. He was tall, maybe mid-20s, with straight black hair that brushed his shoulders. His eyes, dark and steady, lingered on me before he smiled faintly. "You're Diego?" "Yeah," I said. "Come in." Inside, the place smelled faintly of oil paint and turpentine. The furniture was mismatched. A plaid couch, a sagging recliner, but the floors were swept and the kitchen looked clean. On one wall leaned several canvases. I caught glimpses of faces, colors, brushstrokes, but he quickly moved past them. "I'm an artist," he explained. "I work nights at a warehouse. I don't smoke. Rent's due on the 1st. Utilities are included. I like things quiet." The room he showed me was small, just a twin bed and a window overlooking the street, but it was enough. I didn't even haggle. "I'll take it," I said. That night I carried over my boxes of clothes, tools, and the old TV my cousin lent me. I felt lucky, almost relieved, like I'd beaten the odds. For the first couple of weeks, things were fine. Akira and I weren't friends exactly, but we shared late-night meals after our shifts, sitting at the chipped kitchen table with reheated leftovers. He'd ask me about my family, about the shop, about San Antonio. His voice was calm, steady, like he measured every word before letting it go. I didn't know much about him besides the basics. Born in Japan, raised in California, moved to Texas for cheaper rent and more space for his art. He seemed harmless enough. Maybe a little quiet, maybe a little too private, but harmless. Still, every now and then, I'd catch him looking at me a little too long, like he was studying me. At first, I thought it was nothing, just an artist thing. People like that notice details the rest of us ignore. But there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite name, and though I didn't know it then, that look would be the first red flag in a long line of them. By the end of September, the duplex felt less like a place I lived in and more like a stage set. I couldn't explain why. Everything looked normal. The fridge was stocked, the bills were paid, the walls were quiet most of the time, but small things started gnawing at me. The first time I noticed was with my toolbox. I kept it under my bed locked. One night after work I reached for it and found it gone. Panic shot through me. Those tools were my livelihood. I searched the room, the kitchen, even the bathroom. Nothing. 2 days later I found the box sitting neatly in the hallway, every wrench and socket cleaned and arranged in order. "Hey, Akira," I asked at dinner, trying to sound casual. "You see my toolbox?" He looked up from his rice, expression unreadable. "Yes, I borrowed it. I forgot to ask." "You could have told me," I said, half laughing. "I put everything back, cleaner than before." His faint smile returned, but it didn't touch his eyes. Another time, my phone charger disappeared. I tore the room apart, irritated, only to find it later in the bathroom sink. I mentioned it, and Akira shrugged. Maybe I borrow things without asking. I forget sometimes. The way he said it, calm and unbothered, made it hard to argue. But something in me started paying closer attention. At night, when I tried to sleep, I often heard him humming, a low, tuneless sound that drifted through the walls. It wasn't music, not really, more like a drone. Sometimes it kept me awake for hours, and once, at 3 in the morning, I woke to the sound of footsteps pacing just outside my door. I yanked it open, heart pounding, and found him standing there holding a glass of water. "Couldn't sleep," he muttered, smiling too widely. I closed the door without answering. It wasn't until the day I found his sketchbook that the unease became fear. He left it open on the couch while he showered. At first I only glanced, curious, but what I saw made my stomach tighten. Page after page was filled with my face. Not portraits in the flattering sense, but twisted versions. Me screaming, me with hollow eyes, me bound to a chair. Above one drawing, scrawled in heavy black strokes, were the words, "Soon he will understand." I closed the book fast and shoved it back where it had been. My hands shook the rest of the night. When he came out of the bathroom, damp hair dripping, he caught me staring at the sketchbook. "Do you like them?" he asked softly. I forced a smile. "You're talented." His grin widened, and for the first time I felt real fear bloom in my chest. After that, I kept my distance. I worked longer shifts, hung around the shop after hours, and spent weekends at my cousin's place on the north side. I locked my bedroom door at night and tried to convince myself I was overreacting. People express themselves in strange ways. Maybe he just used me as a model. Maybe the drawings weren't as dark as I thought. But then he noticed. One evening we sat at the kitchen table, silent except for the hum of the fridge. He pushed aside his bowl and looked at me. "You don't trust me," he said. His voice was calm, almost casual, but his eyes were sharp. "What? No, it's not that." "It is. You avoid me. You keep your door locked. That makes me sad. Roommates should trust each other completely." I forced a laugh. "I've just been busy with work." He studied me for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Heavy memories. That inspires me." "You move like someone who carries the words," made my skin crawl. A week later I came home late, exhausted, only to freeze in the doorway. The living room was transformed. The furniture was pushed aside and every wall was covered with canvases. My face stared back at me from every angle. Sleeping, walking, eating, brushing my teeth. Some were half-finished, others disturbingly detailed. On one canvas, the paint was still wet. It showed me sitting at the dinner table, wearing the exact clothes I had on that moment. My breath caught. He had painted me as I walked in. "Do you like it?" His voice came from behind me. I spun around. He stood in the hallway, brush in hand, his eyes glowing with some strange intensity. "I can't. This is too much," I stammered. "You can't keep doing this." "It's not me," he whispered. "It's you. You bring it out. You make me see." I didn't answer. I bolted to my room, locked the door, and called my cousin. "I need you to come get me," I said, voice shaking. That night, I packed everything I could fit into 2 duffel bags and left. 2 days later, I returned with a friend to grab the rest of my things. The duplex was empty, no paintings, no furniture, no sign of Akira. "Dude," my friend muttered, staring at the bare walls. "It's like no one lived here." I searched every room, hoping to at least find some clue, but it was spotless. Too spotless. I left with my boxes and told myself it was over, but it wasn't. A week later, I got a text from an unknown number. "You should have stayed." I blocked it. Then came the package. No return address, just my name scrawled in neat handwriting. Inside was a single canvas, wrapped in brown paper. I tore it open and froze. It showed me standing at a grave, my own name carved on the tombstone. I dropped it, my hands trembling. My friend told me to go to the cops, but what could I say? That my ex-roommate mailed me a painting? That he might be watching? I stored the canvas in the garage and tried not to think about it. But at night, when I closed my eyes, I still saw his smile. Months passed. I moved in with my cousin, picked up extra shifts, and tried to move on. But I never shook the feeling that someone was following me. Sometimes, leaving work, I'd notice a car idling across the street. Sometimes, walking home, I'd hear footsteps that stopped when I turned around. One night, I found another package on the porch. No address, no note. Inside was a sketchbook, every page filled with my face. I didn't open it all the way. I burned it in the backyard. After that, the packages stopped. Slowly, I stopped looking over my shoulder. But the fear never left. Even now, years later, I still wonder where Akira went. Did he move on to another city? Another roommate? Does he still paint faces of people who don't know they're his inspiration? I don't know. Maybe I'll never know. But sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I swear I hear that low humming again, drifting through the walls. Trust your instincts. We all want to believe people are harmless, that the strange behavior we notice is just quirks or personality. But when your gut tells you something isn't right, you can't afford to ignore it. A cheap rent isn't worth your safety, and politeness isn't worth your peace of mind. Some doors, once opened, let in more than just a roommate. Sometimes they let in something you can't ever fully shut out. I was 21 when I moved into that little house on East Lemon Street in Tempe, Arizona. It was 2018, and I was halfway through my architecture degree at Arizona State. The place wasn't much, just a single-story house with faded stucco walls, a roof that looked like it had been patched together with duct tape, and floors that groaned every time you set foot on them. But for me, it was freedom. No more cramped dorms, no more cafeteria food, no more RAs telling me to quiet down. My roommate was Omar Khalil, a biology major who'd already been renting the place for a year. He was quiet, polite, the kind of guy who spent more time at his desk than anywhere else. We weren't close friends, but we got along. He'd nod when I came home. I'd offer him some pizza when I ordered too much, and sometimes we'd sit in the kitchen talking about school while the swamp cooler rattled away like it was on its last breath. Money was tight. Between tuition, books, and the landlord threatening to raise rent every other month, we barely scraped by. Omar worked part-time at the library. I picked up small drafting gigs, drawing floor plans for contractors who didn't want to pay a licensed architect. Still, we managed. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. I liked the rhythm of our life there. I'd spend long nights sketching, sometimes falling asleep with my head on the desk surrounded by paper and empty coffee mugs. Omar was usually in his room, lamp glowing under the door while he scribbled notes about cells or chemical reactions. The creaky floors were part of the house's personality. Every step announced itself. Sometimes when Omar walked down the hallway for a glass of water, the sound would travel right into my dreams. One night, though, it wasn't Omar. I woke around 3 a.m. to the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps. Step, pause, step, pause. At first, I thought Omar was up late, but when I peeked out, the kitchen was dark, empty. I told myself maybe he'd already gone back to his room, but when I finally drifted back to sleep, the image of that empty kitchen lingered. The next morning, over cereal, Omar asked casually, "Why were you walking around last night?" I nearly dropped my spoon. "I thought that was you." We laughed it off, both unsettled. But in the back of my mind, I knew the sound hadn't been a dream. It kept happening. Always around 3 in the morning, always that same rhythm. Step, pause, step, pause. I'd wake with my heart already racing, straining to hear where it was coming from. Sometimes it sounded like the hallway, sometimes the kitchen. Once I swore I heard the fridge door creak open and close, followed by the faint scrape of a chair being dragged. When I mentioned it again, Omar brushed it off. Old house. Wood expands at night. He said it with a shrug, but I noticed he started leaving his desk lamp on when he studied, like he didn't want to sit in the dark anymore. I tried to rationalize it too. Houses make noises. The desert cools down at night, the wood shifts, things settle. But the steps were too even, too measured. It sounded like someone was actually walking. One Friday night, I decided to stay up. No sketching, no headphones. Just me on the couch with the lights dimmed, waiting. My phone sat in my lap, flashlight ready. At exactly 3:07, the boards groaned. Step, pause, step, pause. My pulse hammered in my ears. I crept toward the hallway, whispering, "Omar." No answer. Omar's door was cracked open, light spilling out. His lamp was on, his notes scattered across the desk, but Omar was slumped forward, asleep. That's when I saw him. A tall man, shoulders broad enough to nearly brush the ceiling, stood in the shadows by Omar's bed. His beard was thick, his eyes glinted in the dim light, and he wasn't moving. Just standing there, watching Omar sleep. My throat went dry. I forced out a hoarse whisper, "Hey!" The man turned his head, slow and deliberate, locking eyes with me for one unbearable second. Then he bolted, darting past me down the hall so fast the air seemed to shift. I shouted, "Omar, wake up!" My voice cracked. I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking. By the time Omar stumbled awake, the hallway was empty. We searched the house together, every corner, every closet. Nothing. The only sign was Omar's bedroom window, cracked open just enough to slip through. No forced entry. No footprints in the dust outside. When the police came, they dusted the sill, took notes, and shrugged. "Could have been a homeless guy," one officer said. "Windows are easy. Just keep them locked." Easy for them to say. They hadn't seen the way he stood there, silent and waiting. Omar stopped sleeping in his room after that. We dragged our mattresses into the living room, lined them up side by side, and left the lights on all night. It felt ridiculous, two grown men afraid of creaks in the floorboards, but neither of us argued. For weeks, every sound made us jolt upright. A car backfiring outside, a gust rattling the blinds, the pop of the swamp cooler. Everything felt like him coming back. I couldn't shake the memory of his eyes, the way he'd looked at Omar like he was studying him. I asked Omar one night, "You ever see him before? Around campus or anything?" "No," he said quickly, almost too quickly. Then softer, "But I feel like he's been here before." That stuck with me. The more I thought about it, the more I wondered if we'd been living with small signs all along. The missing food, the chair I swore was out of place, the footsteps. Maybe he'd been coming and going long before we ever caught him. I started checking the windows obsessively, pressing on the locks twice, 3 times. I wedged a chair under the back door handle. Omar stopped studying at night unless I was awake too. We were living like prisoners in our own house. And still at 3 a.m., the footsteps came. Sometimes faint, sometimes so close it felt like they were right outside the living room. We never saw him again. Not fully, but I swear some nights I heard the fridge creak open. The whisper of a chair dragging across the kitchen tile. The sound of breathing just beyond the hallway. By mid-semester, the fear was eating us alive. My grades slipped, my sketches grew shaky and unfocused. Omar's notes turned sloppy, his hands trembling when he held his pen. Neither of us was getting proper sleep. One night, I snapped, "Move." "We can't keep living like this," I said, pacing the living room. "We should, with what money?" Omar shot back. His voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it. "Can break my lease and find a new place on a library paycheck?" You think I knew he was right, but I couldn't accept it. "Then what? We just wait until he comes back?" Omar rubbed his eyes. "Maybe he already has." The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. We tried everything. Motion lights in the backyard, cheap alarms on the windows, even a baseball bat tucked under the couch. Nothing stopped the sounds. Nothing eased the feeling that he was still out there, maybe even watching us through the thin blinds. Some nights I thought about chasing the footsteps, forcing myself down the hall no matter what I saw. But every time, fear froze me in place. Because what if he wasn't alone? What if he wasn't just standing there next time? The house, once our little sanctuary away from dorm life, had become a trap we couldn't escape. And the footsteps kept reminding us that someone else had claimed it long before we ever did. We survived the semester, but barely. When the lease ended, neither of us hesitated to move out. Omar transferred to a different rental with new roommates closer to campus. I found a tiny studio with walls so thin I could hear my neighbors argue, but at least I knew every sound came from people I could see. On our last night in the Lemon Street house, Omar and I sat in the living room with the lights on, mattresses still on the floor. Neither of us said much. The house groaned around us, familiar as ever, every creak amplified in the silence. At 3:11 a.m., the fridge door creaked open. We both turned, hearts pounding. The kitchen was empty. That was the moment I knew it wasn't just about one man sneaking in through windows. It was about what fear does when it takes root. Even with the house boxed up, our things packed, we were still trapped in the memory of that figure by the bed. When I finally left Tempe for good after graduation, I drove past Lemon Street one last time. The house looked the same as it always had, sun-baked and sagging. But when I glanced at the darkened windows, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still inside, waiting for the next pair of tenants to laugh off the creaks in the night. Never ignore what feels wrong in your own home. A creak might just be the house settling, but it might also be something else, something waiting. Locks, alarms, even police reports can't give you peace if you refuse to trust your instincts. Your home should be a place of rest, not a place of dread. And if that dread takes hold, the smartest thing you can do isn't to rationalize it away, it's to leave before the footsteps grow louder. Looking back now, I can't believe how easily Marcos and I let a stranger into our lives. In 2015, we were 20-something kids trying to make rent in a modest, single-story rental on Pepperwood Drive, just west of the Strip in Las Vegas. It wasn't glamorous. 2 bedrooms, creaky ceiling fans, desert-baked stucco walls that trapped the heat. But it was ours. I worked nights as a cashier in a casino off Fremont Street. The shifts were long, mostly mindless, but they kept the bills barely paid. Marcos was the ambitious one, juggling shifts at a strip mall cell phone store while finishing online classes in web design. He had dreams of moving us somewhere better, somewhere quieter than Vegas. But in the meantime, we were drowning. It started when our old roommates, 2 good friends who'd been with us since college, announced out of nowhere they were moving to California. That left Marcos and me with the full rent. The first night after they left, we sat at the kitchen table surrounded by overdue notices. Marcos rubbed his forehead and muttered, "We can't afford this place alone." "I know," I said, though the words came out heavy. I'd been fighting the idea of bringing in someone new. Strangers didn't just bring money. They brought baggage, habits, and the kind of tension that could turn a home into a trap. Marcos, ever the optimist, said, "We'll find someone decent. Vegas isn't that bad." I wasn't so sure. Still, we posted the ad online. 2 guys in their mid-20s looking for a roommate. Rent cheap, utilities split, no smoking inside. A week later, Rami showed up. He was wiry, maybe early 30s, with darting eyes that didn't seem to focus long on anything. He walked right in like he owned the place, dropped onto the couch without asking, and called me Al before I'd even introduced myself. He talked fast, cracked weird jokes about the neighborhood, and when we explained the rules, quiet after midnight, keep the kitchen clean, he nodded distractedly like he wasn't listening. Marcos shrugged after he left. "He seems fine enough. We need the rent." I wanted to say no, but the weight of the overdue bills pressed harder than my instincts. Against every red flag in my gut, we let him move in. At first it was tolerable. Annoying, but tolerable. Rami left dirty dishes piled in the sink and slammed doors at 2 a.m. He'd disappear for days, then show up smelling like smoke and something chemical I couldn't quite place. Once he brought in strangers at 2 in the morning, laughing and spilling beer in the kitchen while Marcos and I tried to sleep. When I confronted him, he smirked. "Relax, Al. This is Vegas, not Sunday school." I hated the nickname, hated the smirk even more. But Marcos brushed it off. He's not worth it. Don't fight him. Little things started going missing. My favorite mug, one of Marcos's headphones, even a couple of textbooks I needed for a certification exam. Rami mocked me when I asked about them. Casino boy thinks I'm stealing his homework now? His grin had no warmth. What bothered me most wasn't the missing stuff. It was the way he sometimes stood in the hallway just staring. No words, no explanation. Just standing there until I finally said, "What?" Then he'd shrug and walk away, as if daring me to keep asking. The nights got worse. I'd come home at dawn after a shift and find him pacing in the living room, muttering under his breath. Once I found him sitting at the table with all the lights off, eyes wide like he'd been waiting for me. He only said, "Couldn't sleep." Marcos still tried to stay optimistic. He's just weird, not dangerous. But my stomach told me different. The break-in came on a scorching July afternoon. I got home from work and found Rami pacing the living room, hair sticking up, eyes wide. "Someone broke in," he blurted before I even dropped my keys. "Need to call the cops. Took some of our stuff, I froze." "What are you talking about?" "They were in here," he insisted. "Look around, things are missing." I checked every room. Nothing seemed touched, until I noticed my old Nintendo Wii U console gone from the entertainment shelf. A few games too. That was it. Marcos's stuff was still there, my laptop untouched, even the cash we kept in the kitchen drawer. Rami kept repeating himself, rehearsed, too quick. "They took my stuff too. We got a call." His words sounded against my instincts. I let him call. He paced while waiting for the officers, muttering under his breath. When the squad car pulled up, he slipped outside to get some fresh air. That was the last we saw of him. The police searched, took notes, and eventually checked his car, an old dented Corolla parked at the curb. The doors weren't even locked. Inside they found my Wii U, Marcos's missing headphones, and a couple of kitchen knives we hadn't realized were gone. The officer shook his head. "Coming back. Looks like he staged it. We'll file a report, but honestly, he's not relief mixed with dread." If he wasn't coming back, why did my stomach feel like a knot? That night, Marcos and I threw Rami's clothes and trash bags onto the curb and changed the locks. We told ourselves it was over, that he was gone for good. But 2 weeks later, Marcos spotted the Corolla idling across the street at midnight. The headlights were off, but the engine was running. "It's him," Marcos whispered, peeking through the blinds. By the time we called the cops, the car was gone. The following nights, I couldn't sleep. Every time a car slowed on our street, my heart leapt into my throat. I'd imagine the sound of footsteps outside the door, that cocky grin appearing in the shadows. I started double-checking the locks 3-4 times before bed. Marcos tried to calm me. "He's gone, Al. He's just messing with us." But I couldn't shake the image of him standing in the hallway, silent, daring me to react. That wasn't someone who just messed around. That was someone testing boundaries, seeing how far he could push. I realized then that letting him in wasn't just about money. It was about ignoring every instinct I had to keep us safe. Months passed. We never saw him again in person, though once I thought I spotted that Corolla parked behind a strip mall on my way home from work. I didn't stop to check. Life went on. Marcos finished his web design certificate, I picked up extra shifts, and eventually we managed to move to a smaller apartment on the east side. But the shadow of Rami lingered. Every time a stranger answered a roommate ad, I felt the same tightening in my chest. Every knock on the door after dark made me jump. I learned to trust that knot in my stomach, the one I'd ignored when Rami first sat on our couch and called me Al. The truth is, the scariest part wasn't losing my game console, or even seeing him outside in his car. It was realizing how close we'd come to something worse. He wasn't just careless or weird. He was measuring us, how much we'd tolerate, how easily we'd cave. Next time, it might not have stopped at missing electronics. Even now, years later, when a car idles too long on my street, I can't help but glance through the blinds, half expecting to see that crooked grin waiting in the dark. Your instincts are there for a reason. Money problems, convenience, or politeness should never outweigh the gut feeling that something isn't right. A home should be the safest place in the world, and once that safety is compromised, everything changes. If you ever feel that knot in your stomach about someone, listen to it. It's better to struggle a little with bills than to risk inviting danger into your life. When I left the dorms after my first semester of community college, I thought I was finally stepping into real adulthood. No more RAs breathing down my neck, no more cramped rooms with 3 guys stuffed into one space. Just freedom. I was 19, working nights delivering pizza, and I scraped together enough money to split a modest rental on Riverside Drive with a guy I met through a student housing forum. His name was Darius Cole, 20. A library regular who said he needed quiet and cheap rent. It wasn't a palace, but it was ours. 2 bedrooms, thin carpet, and a kitchen that smelled faintly of whoever lived there before us. The AC rattled when it kicked on, and the fridge made a clicking noise like it was about to die, but it was better than the dorms. At first, life was manageable. We weren't best friends, but we weren't enemies either. Darius was messy, leaving dishes stacked in the sink for days. I was loud, clattering through the door after midnight with greasy pizza boxes and tip money. We'd trade tight smiles, sometimes small jabs. You ever heard of soap? Or, some of us actually sleep at night. But we kept it from boiling over. That balance lasted maybe 3 weeks. Then Darius started pacing. He'd pull at the blinds like he was checking something outside. At first I thought it was just nerves, midterms, caffeine, stress. But one night when I came home, he was glued to the front window. "There's a car outside," he muttered. I laughed. "Yeah, people park on the street, man." "No," he said, tugging the blinds wider. "It's been there since I got back." I leaned over. A dark sedan sat across the street, headlights off, a man-shaped silhouette behind the wheel. He wasn't moving, just sitting. "Probably waiting for someone," I said. But the unease had already set in. The car came back the next night, and the one after that. Always in the same spot, always with someone inside. Sometimes the engine idled for hours, sometimes the car just sat dead silent. I joked nervously, trying to lighten the mood. Didn't laugh. He just closed the blinds tighter and muttered, "Hey, maybe you've got a secret admirer." "Darius, I told you. Someone's watching us." I wanted to believe it was coincidence. Riverside was a busy street. People waited for friends, hooked up for deals, maybe even slept in their cars. But the longer it went on, the more it felt deliberate. The same car, the same shadow behind the glass. Then it escalated. One night, I left for work in my beat-up Toyota Corolla. In the rear view, I spotted headlights pulling out behind me. The same sedan. My stomach clenched. I drove the whole way to the pizza shop with it trailing a few cars back, never passing, never turning. When I finally pulled into the lot, it slowed, then drifted past like nothing had happened. After my shift, I came back around 2 a.m. The sedan was parked 2 houses down from ours, brake lights glowing faintly in the dark. "Okay, this is getting weird," I told Darius when I got inside. He shook his head. "I told you, he's watching us." Sleep became impossible. Every creak of tires outside made me jump. Darius barely left the house anymore, claiming the car circled when he tried to walk to the store. I thought maybe he was unraveling, maybe this was paranoia feeding paranoia. But then I saw it myself. It was 2 in the morning, a week later. I woke to the sound of gravel crunching. I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. The sedan wasn't across the street anymore. It was parked directly in front of our house, engine running. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would wake Darius. Then the driver's side door opened. A man stepped out. Hood pulled tight, shoulders hunched. He started walking up our driveway. I froze. My mouth went dry. "Darius," I whispered harshly. "Wake up." He stumbled over, eyes wide, as he crouched beside me at the window. Together we watched the figure stop halfway up the driveway. Then, slowly, he turned his head. His face wasn't visible, but I swear he was looking straight at us. The porch light flicked on automatically. He froze, then pivoted sharply, walking back to the car. Within seconds, the sedan rolled away silently. We called the cops that night. By the time 2 officers showed up, the street was empty. They asked a few questions, checked the driveway with their flashlights, then gave us the same line I'd heard 100 times in crime shows. Probably just a prowler. Keep your doors locked. It wasn't comforting. Darius refused to sleep in his room after that. He dragged his mattress into the living room, begged me to do the same. We set them up side by side, leaving the lights on every night like kids afraid of the dark. I told myself it was temporary, that the man in the car had gotten spooked, that he wouldn't come back. But I couldn't stop watching the windows, couldn't stop listening for the low hum of an idling engine. Weeks passed. The sedan didn't return, or maybe it did and I just wasn't awake to see it. The fear dug in deeper each night. I stopped focusing in class. Darius stopped eating properly. We lived like we were under siege, 2 young guys barricading themselves in a house too small to hide from anything. Then one morning I woke to find his mattress empty. A note sat on the coffee table. I can't take being watched anymore. I'm moving out. He didn't leave a number, didn't leave an address. Just vanished. I stayed. I didn't have much of a choice. Rent was already overdue, and I couldn't afford to break the lease. But the silence after Darius left wasn't peaceful. It was worse. Every night when I came home from delivering pizzas, I'd circle the block twice, scanning for that sedan. Sometimes I thought I saw it 2 streets over, idling with the lights off. Other times I caught glimpses in reflections, dark glass, faint brake lights, a shape hunched behind the wheel. I never saw the hooded man again, not up close. But that didn't mean he wasn't there. Even now, years later, I think about him. Was he watching us specifically? Was it random? Was it Darius he wanted? Or me? I'll never know. But I do know this. He knew where we lived. He knew our routines. He knew how to make us afraid. And he succeeded. Fear thrives in silence. When we convince ourselves not to act, not to push harder for answers, we give fear room to grow. When something feels wrong, don't dismiss it. Document it. Tell others. Press for help. Because ignoring danger doesn't make it go away. Sometimes it just parks outside your house and waits. Growing up in San Diego wasn't easy. My mom worked 2 jobs, and by the time I hit my senior year at Hoover High School in 2014, she had moved out of state for work, leaving me in the care of my grandmother. Our apartment on Fairmount Avenue was small and noisy, wedged between a liquor store and a laundromat that never closed. The walls were so thin I could hear the upstairs neighbors arguing through the night, and the smell of fried food from the taco stand down the street clung to our curtains. Even with all that chaos, my grandmother kept our home steady. She was strict about homework, always asking about my grades, and she reminded me every single day that school was my ticket out of the cycle we were stuck in. I believed her. I wanted that scholarship, wanted to prove to her and to myself that I could do something with my life. Music was my outlet. I played drums in the school band, and whenever life felt too heavy, I lost myself in practice. That spring we had a concert coming up, and I stayed late almost every night rehearsing with the others. By the time everyone left, I'd still be in the music wing running through pieces, my hands blistered but my heart steady. It was one of those late nights that everything changed. The hallways were dark and quiet as I packed up my sticks and snare. It was past 10:45, the janitors had already finished their rounds, and the whole wing felt deserted. As I walked toward the exit, humming under my breath, I noticed the janitor's closet door cracked open. That was odd. It was always locked tight. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone crouched inside. A man, not in uniform, just a hooded sweatshirt and a pale, narrow face peering through the gap. He didn't move, didn't blink. Can I help you?" I asked, voice shaky. No reply. He just shifted slightly, still staring. My stomach dropped. I muttered, "Whatever, man," and tried to shake it off, but the hairs on my arms stood straight. I quickened my pace toward the trophy case near the exit. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps. Behind me. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped my drum bag. The hallway was empty, just rows of lockers, shadows stretching long under the dim lights. My sneakers squeaked on the floor as I started walking faster, pretending I wasn't scared. I pulled out my phone and texted my best friend Marcus. "Still at school. Think someone's here. Creepy as hell." No reply. At the end of the hall, I reached the exit doors and pushed the metal bar. Locked. My pulse spiked. They weren't supposed to lock until midnight. I rattled the handle again, muttering under my breath when I noticed movement. There he was. A tall, hooded figure stood at the far end of the hallway, completely still. My mouth went dry. "Yo, what's your problem?" My voice cracked. He didn't answer. He tilted his head slowly, like a bird studying prey. Instinct took over. I backed away, then bolted into the locker room, nearly tripping over my drum bag. My hands shook as I fumbled with my phone and called my band director. "Coach, somebody's in the hall," I whispered, my throat tight. "I'm not kidding, he's watching me." On the other end, his voice was groggy. "Hall? Tyrell, slow down. What do you mean someone's in the— he followed me. He's right outside." I hissed but stopped. Boots echoed against the tile. Step, 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 closer. I clutched the phone so hard my knuckles went white. "He's coming," I whispered. Then silence. When my director finally showed up with the night janitor, the hallways were empty. The janitor swore nobody else had been in the building. The police checked the doors and shrugged. Maybe a homeless guy slipped in. Just make sure the place gets locked up earlier. I nodded, but I knew. The way that man stood there, it wasn't random. After that night, I avoided staying late at school, but music was everything to me, and rehearsals didn't end until nearly 9 most nights. Whenever I packed up to leave, my eyes darted to every shadow, every closet door. My friends teased me about it. Marcus said, "You're just jumpy, man." Probably was some dude looking for a warm spot. I wanted to believe him, but in the quiet moments I kept hearing the echo of those boots on the tile. Graduation came, and by the fall I started at San Diego State University. I thought the move would put it all behind me. New city, new dorm, new life. My roommate, Andre Taylor, was easygoing, always joking around, calling me Ty like we'd been friends forever. But even there, in the crowded dorm halls, the unease followed me. Sometimes, late at night, I'd swear I heard the same slow rhythm of footsteps outside our door. I told myself it was just neighbors coming back from parties. Still, I started leaving my desk lamp on when I slept. Andre noticed. Funny, that memory haunted me. "Still scared of the dark, Ty?" he teased. I laughed it off, but deep down it wasn't. Then one night, it came back in a way I couldn't ignore. I woke at 2:13 a.m. The room was dark except for the faint glow of my lamp. The door was open, and in the doorway stood a shadow. My first thought was Andre, oblivious. "Andre," I whispered, but he was snoring. Sprawled across his bed, the figure stepped inside. My chest locked up. I heard the click of the door shutting, then the soft scrape of the lock sliding into place. Panic surged. I scrambled for my phone on the nightstand, but the man lunged forward. I caught just enough of his face in the dim light to know it was him. The same narrow features, the same hood. I shoved hard, breaking free and bolting across the room to Andre's bed, shouted, shaking him awake. Andre jumped up, eyes wide. "Someone's in here." Together we rushed back toward the door, but when we flipped on the lights, the room was empty. The window was locked. No sign anyone had been there. Andre looked at me like I was losing it. "Bro, are you sure?" "I saw him," I insisted, voice breaking. "He was here." Campus security showed up, took a report, and gave us the same line the cops had before. Maybe a homeless man, maybe a prank. They left us with a warning to keep the windows shut and the doors locked. But I knew better. You don't mistake something like that. Not when it's staring right at you. After that night, I never slept in total darkness again. I kept a lamp on no matter where I lived, no matter how tired it made me. Andre eventually moved out saying I was too jumpy. I didn't blame him. Fear changes people. Years passed, but the memory never faded. Sometimes when I walked across campus late, I'd hear footsteps behind me. Same pace, same silence. I'd spin around and nobody would be there. Even now, long after college, I still wake in the middle of the night certain someone's standing in the doorway. My wife tells me it's just dreams, but I know better. That shadow in the hall wasn't just some random guy looking for shelter. I don't know if he followed me from the school, or if he was always something else, something that found me and never let go. All I know is this. Once you've looked into the eyes of someone who's watching you in the dark, you never forget it. Fear leaves its mark. Sometimes it's not about whether the threat was real or imagined. It's about the way it lingers in your mind, shaping your choices long after the moment has passed. When your instincts tell you something's wrong, trust them. Dismissing fear doesn't make it go away. Facing it, acknowledging it, and protecting yourself, that's what keeps you alive. When you're 22 and already carrying the weight of one failed attempt at college, every choice feels heavier than it should. I dropped out once before, embarrassed my family, and promised myself I'd get it right this time. So when I transferred to a local university in Denver, I swore I'd focus. No more late nights, no more slipping grades, no more excuses. The only problem was money. Tuition ate at my savings, and the part-time job I lined up at a hardware store barely scratched rent. I needed a roommate fast, someone who wouldn't bring chaos into my life. That's why when I met Cole Hammond in the library, it felt like luck. He was tall, soft-spoken, carried himself with an easy smile. He told me he was a history student, didn't drink, didn't party, just wanted a peaceful place to focus. I thought, perfect. That's all I wanted too. We grabbed coffee after, talked about splitting bills, and by the end of the week, Cole moved into the spare bedroom of the 2-bedroom rental I'd found on South Pearl Street. At first, it was everything I hoped for. He paid his share of rent in cash, on time. He kept his side of the apartment neat, washed his dishes, never left laundry in the dryer. If anything, he was too quiet. He spent hours in his room, sometimes whole weekends without emerging except to grab water or use the bathroom. I told my sister over the phone, this guy might be the easiest roommate I've ever had. And I believed it, until the small things started. It began with the noises. Some nights I'd wake around 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of running footsteps. Not just creaks, full-on pounding across the living room floor, ending with a door slamming. I'd jump out of bed, check the hall, but every door would be shut. Cole's room always dark and silent. The first time I laughed it off. Old house, thin walls. But when it happened again, I whispered through his door, Cole, you good? Silence. Not even a rustle. 2 nights later, I got out of the shower around midnight, towel draped over my shoulders, steam still clinging to me. As I walked back toward my bedroom, I froze. Cole was standing behind my door, pressed against the wall, his eyes wide open, staring. What are you doing? I snapped, my voice echoing down the hall. He didn't answer. He just turned slowly and walked back into his room, shutting the door with barely a sound. The next morning, I confronted him over cereal at the kitchen table. Night. You were in my room. Why? Listen, man. Last he looked at me like I was speaking another language. What are you talking about? I was asleep. I saw you, I pressed. He tilted his head, gave the faintest smile. Then maybe you dreamed it. The way he said it made my skin crawl. I started locking my bedroom door at night. At first it gave me peace. But soon, Even that wasn't enough. One night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard the faint jiggle of my doorknob. I stood in the hall, toothbrush in hand, listening. The knob rattled again, slow, deliberate. I whispered, "Cole?" No answer. Another night, I fell asleep with my headphones in, only to wake at 3 a.m. to find my door cracked open. My stomach dropped. I sat up, and that's when I saw him. Cole was standing in the corner of my room, not moving, not speaking, just standing, his face blank, his eyes reflecting the light from the hallway. I shot out of bed. "Get out!" My voice cracked with fear. He bolted, slamming his own door. I stood there shaking, my heart pounding so hard I thought I'd faint. That night I didn't sleep. I sat on the edge of my bed with the lamp on, bag half packed, waiting for the morning. The next day I told him I was leaving for the night, packed a bag, and crashed at a friend's dorm. It felt juvenile, but I needed space. Safety. When I came back the next afternoon, the first thing I noticed was my bedroom light. It was on. I hadn't left it that way. Then I saw the note. A single sheet of notebook paper lay on my pillow. In neat handwriting it said, "You shouldn't lock me out." I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. My first instinct was to run, but I forced myself to grab the paper, shove it in my backpack, and get out. That night I called the landlord, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. He sounded annoyed more than anything. "What's going on now?" I told him everything, how Cole had been in my room, the noises, the note. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Truth is, I never checked his references. He had no rental history. Just gave me a recommendation letter I didn't even call on." "Are you kidding me?" I shouted. By the time I begged him to help me get out of the lease, Cole was already gone. His room was stripped bare. No clothes, no books, not even trash in the bin. It was like he'd never lived there. I left that same night. I didn't pack carefully. I just grabbed what I could and stuffed it into my car. Driving away from Pearl Street, I felt like I'd barely escaped something I couldn't name. For weeks I stayed with friends, bouncing between couches while I searched for another place. I told people bits and pieces of the story, but I always stopped short of the truth. Because how do you explain something like that without sounding paranoid? Still, the image stuck with me. Cole standing in the corner of my room, blank face, wide eyes, like he was studying me, waiting. Even now, years later, I sometimes wake in the middle of the night certain someone's in the room with me. My rational brain says it's stress, it's memory, it's nothing. But my gut whispers otherwise. I never saw Cole again, and part of me is grateful. But another part, the part that still locks my door 3 times before bed, knows he could be out there, watching someone else the way he watched me. Living with strangers can feel like a gamble, but your instincts aren't lies. When someone crosses your boundaries, it's not overreacting to protect yourself. It's survival. Peace of mind and safety should never be sacrificed for convenience, money, or politeness. Because sometimes the danger isn't loud or obvious. Sometimes it waits quietly in the corner. When you're 24 and freshly single, the world feels heavier than it should. That's where I was in 2019, dragging myself through long shifts at a coffee shop off Belmont, trying not to think too much about the breakup that had unraveled the life I thought I was building. Rent on a 2-bedroom apartment on S.E. Hawthorne was more than I could handle alone, but I couldn't stand the thought of crawling back to my parents' place in Salem. I told myself I'd make it work. I posted an ad online, desperate for someone, anyone, who could cover half the bills. That's how I met Devin Price. He showed up with a small duffel bag and a half smile, said he was between jobs and just needed a quiet place for a few months. He handed me his half of the deposit in cash, which felt like a miracle. At first glance, he seemed polite. No weird questions, no complaints about the apartment's drafty windows or the squeaky pipes. I thought maybe I'd lucked out. But almost from the start, something about him felt off. Devin didn't really go anywhere. He didn't cook, didn't watch TV, didn't even seem to own much beyond that duffel. Most nights I'd pass his door and hear nothing. No typing, no music, no sound at all. Once, though, I paused and realized he was whispering. Not on the phone, just whispering to the dark. I told myself it was none of my business. Maybe he was praying. Maybe he was practicing speeches. Maybe I was imagining it. I had too much of my own stress to worry about what my roommate did in his room. But the strangeness didn't stay contained there. It started leaking into my life. The first time I knew something was really wrong, I woke up in the middle of the night to a weight in the room. Not sound, not movement, just that prickling sense of being watched. I blinked and saw him. Devin. Standing at the foot of my bed. "Devin? What the hell are you doing?" My voice was raw, half asleep, half terrified. He didn't move for a long moment. His face was blank, eyes unblinking. Finally, he whispered, "You left your window unlocked." Then he turned and walked out. I sat frozen for a full minute before I jumped up to check the window. It was shut, locked. I spent the rest of the night wide-eyed under the blanket, telling myself maybe he sleepwalked. The next morning, over coffee, I asked him, "Were you in my room last night?" Devin blinked, then smiled faintly. "No, I don't sleepwalk. Maybe you dreamed it." He said it so calmly that I almost doubted myself. Maybe it was the stress of the breakup. Maybe it was exhaustion. I tried to laugh it off. But deep down, I knew I hadn't dreamed it. After that, little things piled up. I'd wake to find my door cracked open when I knew I'd closed it. Once I came home from work to a note slipped under the door. "You should lock things tighter. Not everyone is trustworthy." I held the note out to him at dinner. "Did you write this?" Devin stared at me for a long time, then finally said, "Warn you first." His tone was flat. I felt my stomach turn. If I wanted to do something, I wouldn't. I started locking my bedroom door at night. At first it made me feel safer, but soon even that comfort was stolen. I'd wake to the sound of the knob turning slowly, deliberately, like someone testing the lock. I'd sit there, holding my breath, waiting, until finally the pressure stopped. Then I'd hear his footsteps retreat down the hall. Work became unbearable. I'd stumble through my barista shifts on no sleep, snapping at customers, burning milk because my hands were shaking. My manager pulled me aside once. "Everything okay at home?" she asked gently. I wanted to spill everything, but instead I forced a smile and said, "Just tired." Devin never apologized, never acknowledged the tension. He'd sit in the living room sometimes, staring out the window like he was waiting for something. When I tried small talk, asking if he'd had any luck finding work, he'd answer with a shrug, then ask questions about me. "Do you usually leave your curtains open? Do you always come home around the same time?" Questions that felt less like conversation and more like notes being taken. The breaking point came one night when I heard paper sliding across the floor. Another note. This one said, "You're easy to watch." I couldn't ignore it anymore. I confronted him the next morning, fists clenched, voice shaking. "You need to leave." Devin just looked at me with that faint smile. "I told you I wouldn't be here forever." He didn't argue, didn't pack slowly, just gathered his few belongings, if you could even call them that, into the duffel and carried it out. No goodbye, no forwarding address. He was gone before noon. Relief hit me like a wave, but it was mixed with something else. Fear. Because he left too easily, like he had planned it. For a few weeks, the apartment felt lighter. I slept with the door unlocked again. I cooked dinner, watched TV, even invited a coworker over for drinks. I thought maybe I'd overreacted, that Devin had just been socially awkward, that I'd let my paranoia spin out of control. Then the first note appeared. It was under my doormat, still not locking your window. I froze on the threshold, the keys shaking in my hand. The notes kept coming. One was taped to my bathroom mirror. "You're easy to watch." Another was left on the kitchen counter, though I was certain I'd locked the door. Each one felt like a blade slipping between my ribs. I begged my landlord to let me break the lease. "Please," I said, nearly in tears. "Knows how to get in." The landlord gave me a hard time, but finally agreed. "It's not safe." I packed up my life into boxes, moved across town into a studio so small I could barely turn around, but at least it was mine. I changed the locks twice, bought a door bar, even shoved a chair under the knob at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling he knew where I was. Sometimes I'd wake in the dark, certain someone was standing over me. I'd switch on the light and see nothing but my cluttered desk, my half-folded laundry. But the dread never left. I never saw Devin again. But even now, years later, I catch myself checking the windows 3-4 times before bed. Because once you know someone is capable of watching you that closely, you can never unlearn it. We don't always get to choose who we let into our lives, especially when money or circumstances press us into taking risks. But boundaries are not optional. If someone makes you feel unsafe, trust that feeling. Protect yourself early, even if it feels awkward or inconvenient. Your peace of mind is worth more than rent, and ignoring instincts can cost far more than comfort.